Talk about supporting Ukraine through the upcoming winter. Ukraine's foreign minister is pleading for more weapons to fight Russian forces. Terry Schultz reports he is also asking for help for Ukraine's damaged energy infrastructure.
NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg is urging allies to increase their support for Ukraine as it suffers the brutality of Russia's strikes on the country's infrastructure. Stoltenberg calls this the greatest security crisis in a generation, reminding NATO governments that while they may be facing financial difficulties, Ukraine is paying in lives lost.
Our message from Bucharest is that NATO will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. We will not back down.
Allies are expected to offer Ukraine not only weapons, but also non-lethal support, including electricity generators, winter gear, and medical supplies. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is pledging substantial aid for Ukraine's energy grid. For NPR News, I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels.
Secretary of State Blinken says that U.S. aid is worth $53 million. On Wall Street, stocks are lower. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 28 points. This is NPR News.
Good morning. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro in Brookline today. Massachusetts Governor-elect Maura Healey has tapped 5 Harvard affiliates to serve on her gubernatorial transition team, which she announced yesterday. The team, which will be led by Lieutenant Governor-elect Kim Driscoll, includes Healey's former Democratic primary rival, Harvard professor Danielle Allen, as well as Harvard Medical School professors Liza Iazzoni, Elise Taverner, Kennedy School visiting fellow Jerry Rubin, and Thomas Glenn III, as well as State Senator Eric Lesser, who is also a Harvard alum. Healey graduated Harvard back in 1992. The company that owns the Pilgrim nuclear power station says it'll move forward with permit applications to discharge radioactive water into Cape Cod Bay. From our Cape Cod Bureau, GBH's Jeanette Barnes has the story from last night's meeting in Plymouth.
Company Representative David Noyes told the state panel on Pilgrim that Holtec will seek the permit modifications the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency demanded in June. A new member of the panel, Andrew Gottlieb of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod, asked Holtec for a commitment not to discharge the water until the permit issue is resolved. But Noyes said he couldn't make that commitment.
I can't say that.
Oh my gosh. The audience reacted with shock, but it was unclear if Noyes meant Holtec wouldn't make that commitment or only that he wasn't authorized to say. Holtec has insisted previously that the discharge is already allowed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. For CAI, I'm Jeanette Barnes.
In sports, the Bruins host Tampa Bay at the Garden tonight, 40 degrees. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Focus Features, presenting Spoiler Alert, starring Jim Parsons, Ben Aldridge, and Sally Field. Based on the memoir, His Life Story Became a Love Story. Directed by Michael Showalter, in select theaters Friday.
Jim Rowdy, I am Marjorie Egan. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, as we do every Tuesday and every Friday, and we are streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News. Hi, Jim.
Hey there, Marjorie. How are you?
Excellent, thank you.
By the way, the number is 877-301-8970 if you choose to call or text. Were you aware of that?
That's the number. That
is the number.
Yep.
Today, right after the show, the U.S. men's national soccer team plays Iran. The game itself would have been tense enough on the sporting merits. Iran faces elimination from the World Cup if they lose. The U.S. if they lose or even if they tie. But the game is set against a geopolitical backdrop, adding another element. Iran's Islamic Republic has faced sustained public protests for months. Thousands have been jailed and hundreds have been killed in protests. We'll talk about the game itself in about a half hour with NBC Sports Boston's Trenny Casey. But first, we wanted to take your pulse ahead of the game. Are you even watching, given all the issues with the host country and with FIFA? And if you are, who are you rooting for? Which I don't think is that ridiculous question. Again, the number is 877-301-8970. Marjorie hates when I broach the question with her directly. So, Marjorie, are you watching today at 2 o'clock?
Well, I think I will be watching at least some of it. These games are long. They're 90 minutes long and stuff. I get totally why people want the Iranians to win because of the horrors that are going on over there, because of the threats against the players and their families, because of their bravery in not singing the national anthem, then getting taken to task by the Revolutionary Guards of Iran. All
taken
that.
to task. They threatened to kill and torture their families back in Iran.
Yep. So, but I'm still rooting for the Americans.
There's a great piece by Jason Rezaian, who you all know, who writes for the Washington Post, who was in an Iranian prison for what, 500 and some days, I think?
Quite a long time.
Making the case that he always roots for the U.S., but today, for the reasons Marjorie mentioned, he is rooting
how about you?
For Iran. Well, I have a convenient excuse, by the way.
Oh, you do?
I actually have to prepare for a television show.
Oh, you do? Okay.
So maybe with one eye, I'll be watching.
You could record it, Jim, and watch it tonight.
I actually did watch a little bit. I think I told you. I watched a little bit of the tie. Is that it's called a tie? It's tie, whatever it is. A tie with England the other day. We can talk to Trenny in a few minutes about the stoppage time thing. I just don't get. But I want to go back to what you said a minute ago. I don't know what the right. We're going to talk to Marcela Garcia about it too, who also has a wonderful column about her being torn and that sort of thing. The men's team, they did sort of mouth the words of the national anthem.
Yes, they did.
When they were threatened in their second match, but in the first match, they chose. Do you remember the visual? Have you seen it with their arms around each other, shoulder to shoulder,
their mouths closed?
Not saying.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes incredible courage and grace and all that sort of thing. And so I have to say, and when you think about after the killing of the young women by the morality police, they say she just died in custody. Yeah, she died in custody because in all likelihood they killed her. There is a really strong case to be made that this is not about the Iranian government, which obviously will see it as a propaganda thing should they win, but about the people of Iran who are pretty well connected, according to people in the know, with the members of their team.
Well, as Rezaian points out in his piece, at least 450 people, dozens of children have already been killed, thousands have been arrested and imprisoned over these protests. Some have already been sentenced to death simply for exercising their right to peacefully protest. The pressure on the team is enormous. As you say, the threats of violence and torture against their families back home. And, the team captain of the Iranian team took a lot of grief for saying that his team is standing beside the grieving families of Iran. I mean, I tell you, the other thing that Rezaian makes, and it's a very good point, is that if the Iranians do win, then they go on to the next round of plays, and they make the case. He makes the case that their story will still be in the media.
Well, you can't quarrel with that. There's obviously a continued
so are you rooting
international
for? Did you
focus.
say?
I said I don't know. I'm torn.
Oh, you don't know? Okay.
I am torn, actually. 877-301-8970. You know, it's also disappointing at the same time that these Iranian players are risking their own lives and the lives of their families to stand up in solidarity. Did you see when the United States soccer, whatever the thing is that's in charge of it, decides to take some of the symbols off the Iranian flag in solidarity with the protests in Iran? Do you know who said we have nothing to do with this? The coach
team.
of the damn team.
Yeah, the team.
I mean, it's one thing to be quiet, but to basically undercut an act by I think it's called U.S. Soccer to show solidarity with these people is really
the bigger
troubling.
issue is why do we keep doing this? We have talked about corruption with FIFA for years. We've talked about the bribes they probably took.
Who's we? Why do we keep watching, or why do they keep going to those countries?
Why does this?
Bribes and corruption.
Know, but isn't it?
Did you read this morning who else competed for this year's World Cup?
Wouldn't it be something if the teams or the organizations got together and said we have to make changes?
Other than Jimmy Carter, and was it 1980?
I'm not talking.
When was the last time that was done? When they just said we're not going to do this?
That was, I believe, the Russian invasion of was it Afghanistan in 1980? Sure. I think so, with Jimmy Carter. But in any case, the point is, why are all these teams still cooperating in this farce? I mean, the head of FIFA said, let's go to North Korea next. That's a great idea. Why not go to North Korea? I mean, we've talked about the migrant workers that have died over there. Did you know 90% of the workers
I learned that this week.
In Qatar or Qatar, however you want to say it today, everyone keeps changing, whether it's Qatar or Qatar, are migrant workers.
I know that. I didn't know.
Workforce.
Well, they only have a population of 3.8 million. The number is 877-301-8970. Where are you? This is going to watch this thing. If you are, how are you dealing with the fact that there are a lot of troubling things going on? I started to say a minute ago, I didn't know this morning, it isn't like the only bid was a Qatar Do you know the United States, Japan, and South Korea bid for the World Cup this round? And obviously, they were not willing to stuff the pockets of the FIFA officials
that's the allegation.
as much as Qatar. Well, do you doubt it?
No, I don't doubt it, that they were paid off basically to go to Qatar.
By the way, here's Eric from Worcester, our first text. I want nothing to do with the World Cup. The whole situation is despicable. And another one, well, there are a lot of them here, but we'll get to them in a minute. 877-301-8970. Did I mention, I don't know if I did, the match against England the other day, which was, I think you're supposed to say 0-0. Is that what you're supposed to say?
Well, Texter says we're supposed to call it a draw. It's called a draw in English football. This is from Camille on the North Shore. I do not know. I'm not familiar enough with soccer, although I've watched, as most parents have, more than my fair share of soccer games, which do go on endlessly.
But as you said, you don't watch it when your daughter scores a goal. Here's another one that says, feel like not watching isn't going to change a thing. A country under a microscope, like what's happening in your program, I'd say is much more effective. That's unsigned.
Our staff is reminding us that we are hosting the FIFA World Cup 2026.
2020 something.
Yes.
Is it 2026?
2026.
Gillette Stadium's actually going to have some games. And that's
I've seen the Revolution down there. It's kind of weird though. You go because it's not full. Like
It'll
it is
be full
for a
this,
Patriots
don't you
game.
think?
But it will absolutely be full for this. When you see these stadiums over there, these games, there's absolutely overflowing with people.
Well, actually, that is not true.
It's not?
A lot of the games, the stands have been not full. And as a result, one of the arguments made, I don't know who I was discussing with Charlie Sennett yesterday, all the migrant workers who are segregated into these camps or cities away from where the games are. And the point that was made by whoever wrote the piece that we read yesterday said, how about giving cheap or free tickets to the people who built the damn stadiums, many of whom died, especially to fill the seats. And by the way, the answer to your question, why do we keep doing this? Let me state the obvious, then we'll get to the calls at 877-301-8970. We keep doing it, because they pay off the FIFA people. But your flip side is, if one country, the United States, said we're not going to play this game, you got to go to a democratic nation, as flawed as they all are, but a democratic nation, and then Fox Sports, for example, could not pay whatever fee they are, they wouldn't go to Qatar. I mean, isn't that pretty obvious? It is all about the bottom line. And unfortunately, we're not willing to test it. Let's go to Lily in Cambridge. You're first on Boston Public Radio. Thank you so much for calling. Hi, Lily.
Hi, how are you?
Excellent.
Good. Thanks for this conversation. Marjorie, you're in response to your question about, why don't teams just stand up and say they're not going to participate anymore? I think an important perspective to keep in mind here is that for many of these players, especially from the global south, this is their livelihood, and so it's just, I think, an unfair expectation to suggest that the teams themselves need to be the ones to lead change.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. But maybe the countries or something. I just don't know, Lily, how we solve this problem.
I'm with you. I'm a big soccer fan. I played all my life, and I've been so conflicted about watching this World Cup. It's really challenging.
But I'm so glad you admitted what you just said, the conflict, which Razayan mentioned, which Marcela Garcia mentioned in her piece. So how do you resolve the conflict, Lily? You watch feeling guilt-ridden?
Yeah.
No,
I don't know. Good question.
I'm not critical of you. I get it. Go ahead.
No. It's a fair question. It's a certain amount of cognitive dissonance. My whole family, we're big soccer fans. I, frankly, much rather be on the field myself than watching on the TV. But I've got a 6-year-old son who loves soccer, and he is really into this World Cup. And, he's looking up to these players, and there's something really special about that. But the larger politics of it, I don't know.
It's hard. It's hard. By the way, thanks for the call, Lily. For your 6-year-old son, we should play sound that I think virtually everybody in this country has seen. This is the Tyler Adams, who I think is the captain
of
the U.S. team. An Iranian journalist raises his hand and complains that he was
hammered. He's getting hammered by the Iranian
he
journalist.
Is? Well, he's told he's mispronouncing the name of the country. Mm-hmm. It's pronounced Iran. And here is how Tyler Adams, in part, responds.
in the U.S., we're continuing to make progress every single day. I grew up in a white family with obviously an African-American heritage and background as well. So I had a little bit of different cultures, and I was very, very easily able to assimilate in different cultures. So, not everyone has that ease and the ability to do that. And obviously it takes longer to understand. And through education, I think it's super important. Like you just educated me now on the pronunciation of your country.
I introduced that very poorly, I should have said. And the question asked after the journalist said, you're mispronouncing the name of our country, and Tyler Adams apologizes, is how do you deal with discrimination in your own country? And he, without missing a beat, he wasn't swallowing, he wasn't anxious, he wasn't nervous, he just was pretty forthright.
And said that discrimination exists everywhere.
Yeah.
And I thought he was incredibly poised for a young man who was put in a very uncomfortable position.
I agree. Isabella in Worcester, you're next on Boston Public Radio. Thanks for calling. Hi.
Hi, I'm calling, yes. I'm a longtime fan of the World Cup. I was born in Venezuela, and even though my country doesn't often make it or never really makes it, I still watch it. It's just a moment of unity for a lot of people. My families are all migrants, and so it's a moment of unity for us, whatever country we're rooting for. I will say, I think this World Cup, I do feel conflicted, as a lot of people do, but I also thought about the ways in which I think Islamophobia plays into a lot of the criticisms. I think inevitably there's human rights violations in Qatar that we need to talk about, but I also think a lot of our discourse around it can lean to a little bit of Islamophobia, and I'm concerned about the way that we talk about some of the issues in Qatar without considering issues in our own home countries as well.
Well, I think that's legit, except to say, only speaking for this show, we had similar discussions about when Olympics were going to places like Russia, Beijing, and those sorts of places. So I think your criticism has some validity, but there's also an even-handed basis for criticism and acknowledgement that we've got problems here too.
Well,
and you make good points, Isabella.
Authoritarian countries where if you criticize the government, you wind up in the gulag. I mean, I think that's what we're seeing here with the players' families being threatened with torture and violence and imprisonment, and the players themselves. I mean, you wonder what's going to happen to them when they return to their country. I think that's one of the big issues.
By the way, that is a real real serious issue. The question is, if they toe the line today in any future matches, if there are any, obviously, as I said, they have to tie or win. That's Iran to get to the knockout round or whatever the hell it's called. They're at great risk. There's no question about it.
Benjamin in Brighton wants to know, what would Emmett Price do? And the reason he's asking that is because Emmett no longer watches the NFL.
Even though he loves the NFL. He loves
a principled
football.
stand. Yeah, he looks like he could be a football player himself. He's a big guy. What would Emmett do? And that's a very good question. Did we ask him what he would do about the World Cup?
I don't think
we forgot about that.
But, I should say, in the spirit of full disclosure, which we don't embrace as often as we should, watching this I would argue, is at least semi-unprincipled if you care about a lot of the human rights issues. But it's not nearly as directly unprincipled as when you do what we do, is trash how Jeff Bezos treats his people, what he does about the environment, and then go to Amazon and there's a direct impact. Here, turning on your television set doesn't have quite the direct impact, even though the ratings do matter in terms of what the sponsors
Fox has not exactly been exemplary
virtually nothing
in its pointing out the human rights violations in Iran at all. They've kind of ignored the whole situation. Matt from someplace in New England, thanks for calling.
Well, that
Hi, Matt.
narrows it down, Matt. How are you? What are you worried? We're going to give your address to the FBI or something?
No, just the point that, I didn't want you to pigeonhole me into one spot in New England.
Fair enough. I don't know what that means, but okay. No. What's up, Matt?
Yeah, I just, called to make the point of, the ability or the concept of separating the game from the politics. The sport that is a culture in much of the world, that has existed before and throughout corruption or players or whoever. And I think on the point of who do you root for, if you can separate it from the game itself and the politics, you say you root for the U.S., of course, or whoever you root for, and then you let the politics speak for themselves after the fact. And obviously, if a team wants to make a statement, great, let them do it, but then always try to center it back to the game itself.
You know, Matt, when you said the team...
As a soccer fan.
I got it. I think you speak for a lot of people. When you say if the team itself wants to make a gesture, Margie and I read a piece this morning, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who wrote it.
Was the Resign piece about the flowers?
Yeah, the last time Iran and the United States played, I think it was 1998, he said?
Yes.
Tell the story, if you would.
Well, the Iran players offered their American counterparts flowers before the match. And what Resign, and Jason Resign, his name is, he wrote this in the Washington Post, was saying a reciprocal gesture of kindness from the United States to match the 1998 Iranians' white flowers would go a long way. So
to show solidarity with the protesters
if there
back
might
home.
be kind of some gesture from the team. But again, you know, it's one of the previous callers pointed out, this is a lot to throw on the teams. I mean, it is, from a lot of these countries, how people make their living for the rest of their lives is being stars.
What's going to happen to a U.S. player if a U.S. player hands a flower to an Iranian?
Well, they're going to get praise, I think, from coast to coast for doing it, for making that gesture. But what I'm saying is, other countries, it is a much different situation than in the United States.
Well, how about the fact that those 7 captains of Western European teams were going to wear the One Love armbands in solidarity with LGBTQ people who are being persecuted when they were threatened with a yellow flag, which I guess you get 2 of them and you're thrown out of the game. They all faded. And that lonely BBC reporter, that woman, I think her name is Alex Scott, we talked about last week. Alex Scott was wearing it as she's doing her broadcasting from the pitch or whatever the hell it's called.
The bigger thing, and I don't know enough about the machinations to know the solution, but the bigger thing is FIFA shouldn't be running this. The Olympic Committee shouldn't be running the Olympics. Corruption, corruption, corruption. And we keep going back and doing the same thing every 4 years. We scream about it, we complain about it, and we do nothing about it. So that seems to be the problem, that FIFA is in charge just like the International Olympic Committee is in charge. And it's the same kind of disgraceful thing year after year. Anyway, you're listening to Boston Public Radio. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library. We're streaming online at youtube.com, GBH News. We're talking about the World Cup, conflicting feelings. The Americans are playing the Iranians today at 2 o'clock. Are you tuning in? Are you rooting? What do you think of our being there at all? And what do you think of FIFA still running international soccer? 877-301-8970 is the number you can call us or text us at. Again, this is Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH.
From the GBH Newsroom.
I'm Tori Bedford. I'm the Dorchester reporter at GBH News. Local news is vital. When you have news told from a perspective of someone who understands the context of the area, who can incorporate the community perspective, then you're really getting the most authentic version of the story. As we see more of these local news resources disappear, we're losing that perspective, and we have to fight to retain that.
Part of your community. GBH 89.7.
Support for our programs comes from you and Cure Alzheimer's Fund, which supports foundational scientific research into the causes of Alzheimer's disease, because research is the only path to a cure. Learn more at curealz.org. And Swan Galleries with modern and post-war art, featuring Alma Thomas and the Washington scene at auction December 1st. The auction also includes Latinx and Latin American art. Catalog and bidding on the Swan app and at swangalleries.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browding, Marjorie Egan, live at the Boston Public Library, streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the World Cup match this afternoon between Iran and the United States. 877-301-8970. You're watching the World Cup, given everything that we have learned about the host nation, Qatar, and about FIFA. And if you are, who you're rooting for, 877-301-8970. Jill from Arlington texts, so Jim, you can't watch a Woody Allen movie, but you can watch a World Cup game. Interesting. That is a very fine point, Jill. As soon as I figure that out, I'll get back to you. 877-301-8970.
Ali from Cambridge, thank you for calling.
Hey, Ali.
Good morning to you. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
Thank you.
I would like to start with something that happened last week, namely the game of England versus Iran.
Yep.
That England scored 6-2. And at that evening, Iranian people came to the streets and became very happy. And so the reason is that, as you might have heard, there is a big uprising happening in Iran. hundreds of people have been killed over there. And this team is not really a national team of Iran. It's a team that sided with the regime. And many of the top players, for example, just mentioning one of those, Mr. Buria Ghafouri, that was the main team, because of the protests, they put him in prison. So right now the situation is that Iranian people are rooting for the U.S. team to win because this is not our national team. This is a team that has bowed to the regime while the Iranians are fighting to overthrow the regime.
Well, Ali, this is hard for me to do since you're Iranian American. I've read a lot about this, and while I don't have your personal experience, I think there's a real dispute about whether or not this is a regime team or a team that is doing, the Iranian team, doing as much as it can to stand up in support of the protesters. So while we totally...
But, the reports are very clear. Before they come, they went to bow to the president and so on. And also,
Ali, can I tell you something? There is a guy who I've interviewed a lot of times who spent 500 days of his life in an Iranian prison, Jason Rezaian, not knowing if he would ever get out. And I think he's a pretty reliable source. And respectfully, he disagrees with you. I'm not in any way diminishing your position, but there is not unanimity.
I have many things to say about that, but I just want to concentrate on that issue. For example, I don't know if you have heard, they have banned many of the news agencies. The main one is Iran International, from coming even to Qatar to cover it. The Iranian regime has been employing Indian and Pakistani workers in Qatar to go and fill out. So if you go and study this becomes very, very clear that what the situation is. And
Ali,
also, if you go back and go ahead, please.
No, you go ahead. No, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
So I just want to know if you just
Ali, just a question. Then why did they not sing the anthem? Was that just a fraud?
You mean the first time?
Yeah, first game.
They did it. Yeah, the first game they did it, but in the second game they didn't do it.
Well, because with all due respect, Ali, their families were threatened with death and torture. I probably would sing the national anthem if someone said, if you don't, your family's going to die.
This is the choice that people are going to make. The people are getting killed already in prison. The kids, young age kids, are killed in the streets because they are protesting against the regime.
Got it. Hey, Ali, we appreciate your perspective. Really appreciate your call. Thank you for sharing your perspective, and thanks for your time. 877-301-8970.
A texter says, far too late for hand-wringing over the horrible Qatar World Cup. The world had decades to investigate, to change FIFA, and did nothing. Let the athletes play and reform FIFA in earnest the day after the tournament ends.
Well, there was also litigation. Was it New York State against them? And FIFA did pretty well in that litigation. In fact, some of them are getting awards, financial awards, from FIFA, from the courts there. So there have been attempts. But again, read books like Andrew Zimbalist's book, who is probably for example, financial expert on World Cup and Olympic Games. And I think you see that there is a lot of financial incentive for the, quote, leaders of these organizations to make the undemocratic decisions they make.
Richard from Barrington, thank you for calling.
Hi, Richard.
Hey, good morning, Jim and Marjorie.
Hey.
Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I told your producer there that I have a contrary opinion. First, FIFA's as corrupt as they come, probably only second to the NFL. Second, we've known about this going on in Qatar for years, and we waited until the tournament started for the media to pick it up and start, and everybody to start with the armbands.
That's fair.
What's going to happen when the tournament's here and the rest of the world, different cultures, are many of them of color, start saying, hey, the United States is only 4% of the world's population, and they have 25% of the incarcerated people, and most of them are of color.
Well, by the way, Richard, they've started saying that already, and we've repeated some of their claims. They have some legitimacy, but the quote Marjorie Egan a few minutes ago, what I think separates them beyond the intensity of that persecution is there is a democracy here, imperfect though it may be. People can protest, people can stand up and say whatever the hell they want outside Gillette Stadium, for example, when that game is played there. You can't do that in Qatar or in Iran or in a lot of these other countries. But you make a good point, Richard. Thanks for making it. Thanks for calling. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970. You know, this whole notion that these games, whether they're Olympics or are above politics, and it's just countries coming together. I mean, it is such, I mean, nothing is above. You know who hasn't weighed in on this, by the way? I know a lot of listeners get upset when I mention his name. Trump hasn't nosed his way into this thing to trash whoever he was choosing to trash today, the special prosecutor, President of the United States.
Well, I think it isn't about
Governor Kemp.
It isn't about him.
He can figure out a way it is about him.
Maybe he can. Maybe he plays soccer. And I know
I would say that's fairly unlikely.
Sally in Newbury, thank you for calling.
Hey, Sally, what's up?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm just calling because I'm married to an Uruguayan, and he's a U.S. citizen, and soccer for the rest of the world is the most important and unifying element. I don't think we understand that here because we have a lot of different professional sports that people follow, and soccer's probably the least important one, even though more kids play it.
Yep.
But we had a lot of family members here from all over, including France, and we watched a lot of soccer, and there was a lot of conversation about what is going on in Qatar and FIFA and the effect that FIFA has on players, and that the fact that they couldn't wear their rainbow armbands. There's a lot of support for human rights among soccer fans, and I think that we need to understand that, again, these players, it's their livelihood. FIFA is so powerful. They can fine them. They can prevent them from playing.
Understood.
And I think that FIFA has to be dealt with by the owners of the teams, and they are the ones that really have the power to fix the corruption, and the players are pawns, just as they are here at the NFL or any other major sports. It's really soccer for the rest of the world is such a unifying, uplifting. But I think you're doing a disservice to the fans, Jim, when you because people want to watch the games. It's as if they don't care about what's happening there either.
No, by the way,
Really
Sally, with all due respect, I said I'm as torn as anybody. I haven't made some grand political statement saying, as an act of principle, I'm going to shut off the TV at 2 o'clock. I'm as torn as I think most people of decent conscience are. The one thing I'd say to you, though, Sally, about this notion, one of the things we haven't said today, which we should have, is a lot of people who defend international games like this, going to places like Qatar, say it shines a spotlight on the abuses and gives there a greater possibility for pressure on those countries to reform. I can't think of a situation, I may have missed one, maybe you can, Sally, where that sort of focus on a place like Qatar has changed the lives of people who live in that country for the better after the fact. I mean, generally from what you read, once the spotlight's off, it gets often even worse because of the anger of the leaders of that country. Having said that, you made a great point too, and we thank you very much for the call and enjoy the game.
Thank you, Sally.
What are you laughing about?
Because I know her.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, 877-301-8970 is the number if you want to call us or text us. Allison.
Actually, we're done.
We're done. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we are done.
So you can still call us or text us. We're just not going to take your call.
Okay. Up next, we're going to talk about soccer and a lot of other things with NBC Sports Boston anchor reporter Trenny Casey. She is next. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, and we are streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News.
One of Japan's biggest cults is run by someone named Master Okawa. He claims to channel the spirits of dead politicians, from George Washington to Margaret Thatcher.
Come down to this place and answer our questions.
Now he's recruiting followers in the U.S. His story, next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you. And Boston Ballet, presenting The Nutcracker. Dare to dream big with New England's favorite holiday tradition. You can gather with family and friends to see it live at the Citizens Bank Opera House now through December 31st. Tickets at bostonballet.org. And the Corcoran and Haviland Insurance Group, an independent insurance agency providing risk management and insurance protection to families and businesses throughout Massachusetts. Learn more at chinsurance.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jim Browdy. She's Marjorie. And we're live at the Boston Public Library, streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News, discussing a fabulous sandwich from the Newsfeed Cafe.
It is fabulous.
We're joined now at our studio in the Boston Public Library by Trenny Casey. Trenny is an anchor and reporter for NBC Sports Boston and a BPR contributor. Hello there, Trenny.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
So, Trenny Casey, we've been talking about this with listeners for the last half hour. What do we do about this mess of FIFA going back every year? We all talk about the corruption. We all talk about the bribes. We all talk about the horrible state of affairs in Qatar. And then we keep going. And now they're talking about North Korea. I don't even, are they serious? I don't know.
And we should say, we're talking to a woman who's broadcast from a ton of Olympic games for NBC.
Right. And it should be noted that the next 2 Olympic Games are actually the next 3, I think, are in what I guess we would consider, not just consider, but they are democratic nations.
Los Angeles and what else?
Well, no, we've got Paris 2024.
Paris.
It's outside of Milan, the winter of 2026, and 2028 is Los Angeles.
Well, that's good.
And I think it goes all the way up. I forget which other are coming up, but there's also one, I believe, in Brisbane, Australia. So I think
a break from the authoritarian countries.
Listen, I'm not making excuses in any way, shape, or form for these organizations, but I think what they've tried to do is they have historically favored European and North American countries to hold these games, right? So I wonder if in their mind they feel as though it is a more global world now, and we should branch out into Asia. We should branch out into the Middle East. These are people who are a part of FIFA, and they should have just as much of a right to host these games as anyone else. But I listened to, Zoe emailed me this morning and sent me the daily from yesterday, the New York Times, and I listened to the podcast about, the bribery that went on, paying like one of the best French players in the world, basically paying him through silence of saying, we're going to give you millions of dollars to tell everybody this is a great place to have. To have the World Cup. That 65, according to The Guardian, 6,500 migrant workers were killed since 2010 building these stadiums. And at some point, to me, FIFA isn't going to step in because FIFA is the one making money off of it, or the International Olympic Committee, right? So you have these mostly pretty much all men in charge who are making these backroom deals. They're lining their pockets. They're being bribed by these very wealthy countries, or in the case of even a not wealthy country like, say, a Russia, you have oligarchs who are doing things behind the scenes. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. And so they get these games. To me, and it comes down to advertisers. Marjorie, I know your buddy who called in said, well, the owners of these soccer teams should step in. Unfortunately, there aren't owners, right? This is not, they're countries, they're U.S. national teams. They're technically run by nonprofit governing bodies. They're not nonprofit, but you know what I mean? They're U.S. governed bodies, right? These are, even though they're not amateur athletes, it's kind of seen as like, it's different. It's the country, not an owner.
Yeah.
So what it comes down to, and it's a lot of pressure to put on advertisers, but it comes down to Budweiser. It comes down to what the credit card company, the credit card company for Olympics is always Visa, right? Coca-Cola,
how about a network?
McDonald's,
Networks
NBC
to cover
broadcast and cover these things if they're going to be in these nations. But it's hard, right? Because let's say Coca-Cola or NBC says, you know what, we are going to take the high road. If it is in one of these countries, we are not going to broadcast the Olympics, or we're not going to broadcast the World Cup on Telemundo, which they have as well. Okay, then somebody else just swoops in and does it. All of them would have to come together. CBS, NBC, ESPN, ABC, Fox would have to come in. All of those networks would have to agree that none of them, Amazon, Hulu, all of these entities.
I think the president could actually override all that, as Jimmy Carter did 40 years ago. If Joe Biden, I don't know by what vehicle, if Joe Biden said, we're not sending the national team, I think it'd be pretty hard for anybody.
We talked about on this show too. I know people say, well, just don't go and play, but this is something that is for a lot of these athletes is the pinnacle of their career. And is that fair to put it on there?
What countries have you been to in the last couple of Olympics?
I have been to Sochi, Russia.
Stop. That's what I wanted to ask. Were you told, and by the way, if you can't answer the question, you can take the fifth, it's fine, and you won't be criticized, at least on the air. You'll be criticized off the air. When you go, does NBC say to you, when you're broadcasting whatever you did there, tennis or curling or whatever you did,
I was curling.
You're not allowed to say anything about any if there's a demonstration outside the tennis stadium or the curling venue, you Trenny Casey, and you, Jane Doe, your partner, can't say anything about what's going on.
It kind of depends. That is a good question, and I'll try to not skirt around the answer.
Okay.
The way it is said to us is that they do try to, we'll call it like sort of a separation of church and state, right? So at least with NBC, they send a separate set of news people. Like Stephanie Goss is often, or Richard. I remember when we were in Russia, I was super psyched because I loved Richard Engel.
Yeah, he's great.
He's just this really great foreign correspondent. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a foreign war correspondent. And then I was like, oh, yay, sports. And so people like him are there, like Keir Simmons, who is their London bureau reporter. They send their big news reporters there who they go and they cover the geopolitical issues. Because let's be honest, I am not trained in the way that Richard Engel is to cover geopolitical situations. So for me to have commentary on them, at least at that level, is probably irresponsible for NBC. NBC, I know in Beijing, even in South Korea, with North Korea obviously being the next country over, they bring in Korean political analysts, and they have, I know they've made an effort to have someone, like even at the opening ceremonies, to sort of explain the culture and the geopolitics that are happening. But yes, we are told to mind our P's and Q's, like be careful because of the things that you say and do. They can be used against you.
Somebody texted, as you're saying it, Fox's job is to show the effing soccer game, Jim. Can we talk about an upbeat note about this?
Which I don't entirely, and I think NBC, I don't entirely disagree that when you turn on, say, a curling match, do you really want me and a guy from Canada, and Jason, our play-by-play guy, talking about, if we're in Pyeongchang, talking about what's going on in North Korea? Well, of course not. You tune in to learn about, the athletes that are there.
I think you can walk and chew gum. I haven't done what you've done, so I speak without that knowledge or experience.
And a lot of time, I don't know. I guess, to be quite honest, I have never, the closest I guess I've come to sort of controversy in an event that I've been at, I think it was Pyeongchang, where Russian curlers were disqualified for performance-enhancing drugs.
Curlers?
Well, yeah, because people laugh, oh, curlers, but I think they took I don't remember, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think they took something that helped them cardiovascularly, and it was a mixed doubles. So you sweep and you throw the rock. So if you throw the rock, you get up and then you help your partner sweep. That actually takes a lot of cardiovascular. And the other thing, Zverev, is it Andrew Zverev? And now I'm blanking on his first name, but Zverev, he is a German tennis player leading up to the Olympics in Tokyo, and he was in he won the gold medal at the Olympics in Tokyo. A lengthy article had come out recently about him physically and verbally abusing a girlfriend who had then pressed charges against him. And to her credit, I'm just really blanking on Mary Carrillo. Thank you. Mary Carrillo said, I am not going to call this match. I am not going to be the analyst on this match and not mention what he did to that woman and let people know who they are watching. And NBC allowed her to. Mary has been there long enough. She is a well-respected reporter within NBC and HBO. So there are moments when it crosses over. Like, for instance, I think if NBC, and and I think Telemundo has done this. I don't speak Spanish, so I don't know for sure. But I think in some of the articles I've read, Telemundo has discussed on their air, similar to BBC, they've cross-covered things. So they have talked about the political issues alongside of the soccer
Okay, so if you can't talk about the political issues, you should at least be able to talk about the Japanese cleaning up the stadium. This is one of the best stories. Tell the story for those who don't know.
This is awesome, and having gone to Japan for the Olympics, this did not surprise me. If anyone's ever been to Japan, it is the cleanest place I have ever been. And what's more miraculous, there aren't trash cans anywhere. So people will walk, they will finish a coffee, and they will hold it in their hand until they get inside, and then they will put it. Then they will pour it into like a composting thing, the coffee, and they'll put their plastic cup in a plastic container and their paper cup in a paper container. It is the most immaculate. No one has to lock up their bikes there because they feel that it is a show of respect to leave a place cleaner than when you left it. So they go to these World Cup. Now Japan's out. They aren't very good, so they're not going to advance. I
thought they beat one of the big teams. Didn't they?
They beat Germany.
Oh, but they're still out. Okay.
Actually, I don't know if they've been eliminated yet. I thought I read yesterday that they were eliminated, but they don't have a great chance. All right, so anyway, beside the point. So the Japanese fans, they go, they party, they eat their popcorn and stuff, and then they're getting ready to leave the stadium, and they're picking up all their trash and they're putting it in plastic bags.
Not just theirs, by the way.
And everyone's trash. Anything that they see around it, and like the stadium workers are just standing there with like nothing to do. But even better, the Japanese national team cleans up their entire locker room, picks up all of the trash and garbage, and then left origami.
Oh, I forgot about that.
For the stadium workers, swans, and they left a message, like basically a thank you message in both Japanese and Arabic. It's pretty amazing. The Japanese culture is, I went in COVID and I wasn't able to explore, but it is just, God, we're savages here.
One last thing about this, by the way, I don't know, I've watched very little of this, not as an active principal, I just haven't had the time. I watched the end of the tie with England, the draw, whatever it is with England the other day, and then I watched some highlights.
It's a draw, 0-0.
Whatever the hell it is. It was 0-0, actually. Which, by the way, since we're on the topic, can you explain something to me? And
why is it different?
No, forget why it's different. I'm listening to the end of the game, and not only did I not know when the game was over.
Oh, I know.
But the announcer didn't know when the game was over. Stoppage time, Zoe, our colleague who played soccer when she was younger, or maybe still plays, explained it to me. But the announcer said, I believe, this is when the U.S. had the final, shot at the goal, or opportunity.
I think they had a free kick.
No, it wasn't a free kick. It was they had the ball and whatever. And he said, I believe this will be the final offense.
Yes, I was
He
watching.
didn't even know when the damn game was over.
There's one person who knows. It's insane to me that no one knows when a game is over. Like, I don't understand why you don't just, and maybe Zoe can explain to me, why don't you just add the time to the clock so that everybody knows?
You have a clock. It's very useful.
Yes, I have a clock on my show.
For some of us, it's useful, Marjorie.
It's right. It's very useful.
It is really, it's one, and I actually like soccer, and I think that there are a lot of things in soccer that we could apply to American sports, like relegation in the English Premier League.
You get dumped down.
If you suck, you don't get to play at the highest level anymore. You go down a level. Like you don't get a high draft pick. You don't get rewarded for being terrible. Like you can't suck for luck like the Colts did years ago. If you stink, you have to go down a level. I love it.
I don't know
if
baseball.
I just
baseball
said
does that.
Like
don't they?
No.
Don't you go to AAA if you're not very good?
No, an individual player. This is the whole team.
This is the whole team.
The whole team.
So
oh my God.
So like, let's say Manchester, which this never happened with Manchester City because they have too much money and they're too good. But let's say Manchester City has a terrible, or Tottenham has a terrible season, and they finish at the bottom of the Premier League. They go down to a lower level, and then you have to win. Don't you watch Ted Lasso?
I did watch Ted Lasso, but I didn't really understand what was going on.
They got relegated. They had to win their last match, and they got relegated.
Yeah. I paid attention to the boss and Ted.
Now, can I say one other thing about
Ted's
this?
marital woes, the boss is dating.
I don't know anything about soccer at all, except stoppage time that no one understands. I watched on some video highlights the other day. Did you say Lionel Messi? Is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
Scoring that goal.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable that a human being can do
I know.
what he
what
did.
else?
He's never won a World
Running
Cup.
up and down that field for 90 minutes.
Oh, I know.
I mean, can you imagine? The NFL, you get the downs. I mean, basketball, but it's a much smaller court. This is one big, massive
And we talk about we don't love stoppage time in soccer. But how great is the fact that there are, and I don't understand why we can't do this why can't we do this in American sports? There are two halves. Each are 45 minutes plus the stoppage time, which we all know is a little weird. But that's it.
Yeah.
There are no commercial breaks.
That's
You
true.
don't get to go have a timeout
Yeah.
and like powwow and get some Gatorade. You don't get to sub out guys. You just have to be in incredible shape, and it's fast.
Well, they
it's
are.
always 2 hours.
In incredible
with
shape.
a halftime, unless it really goes into like a shootout. And so like a sudden death type thing in soccer, it is a 2-hour sporting experience.
You know
It
what we
is
should do?
wonderful.
By the way, this would be bold, but I think we should just make an executive decision right now. Why don't we do stoppage time today? instead of predictably, and how old is it and tired that we end at 2 o'clock every day?
Yeah.
Let's just, whatever there were breaks in the action, let's add a little time. Don't tell anybody.
I don't think we can do that,
And just
Jim.
keep it going until we feel like leaving.
Yeah, I think we'll just get cut off.
Make sure
I
all
like
those
it.
callers you said to call and keep texting can call and keep texting until they don't want to.
We're talking to Trenny Casey. You know what? When I want to move up a little bit on our list, we not go out of our way. I think we've been pretty candid about a revered figure in this community, Robert Kraft,
Yes.
about some of the underside of his behavior from time to time, particularly about the women from Orchard, whatever the hell it was
Yep.
called,
Asia-
where one of the people was
Orchids of
departed,
Asia, right?
and he apologized to absolutely everybody except the women involved. However, he deserves praise
He does.
for what he did with the Patriots plane. Can you tell people what happened the last few days?
This is really wonderful. So if you were following the story about the football players, there were 3 football players from the University of Virginia who had gone to an event in Washington, D.C. They were on a bus. And a former player who had played with the team in 2018, I think was finishing up his degree. We still haven't, to the best of my knowledge, a motive has not.
I haven't
I
read
have
it.
not
I haven't
seen
seen
a
it either.
motive released. But this young man carried a gun onto the bus, and while one of the players was sleeping, walked up, shot and killed the player, and then killed the other 2 players. Everyone else on the bus. There was another woman was hurt. I think 2 other people were hurt, but those were the only 3 young men that died. They all played for the University of Virginia football team, and they, of course, wanted to go to their funerals. But because they're college football players, they were all from 3 different states, 3 different days of funerals, and the entire team wanted to attend, but they just, quite frankly, didn't have the money to attend all 3 funerals. So Robert Kraft, because the team played on Thursday, they don't need their plane at all. They're playing at home this week against the Buffalo Bills. Robert Kraft paid for the plane tickets, donated the plane, and allowed the entire team to travel on their plane to go to attend each funeral of each of their teams.
You know, to make it even better, and by the way, congratulations to him and them for doing this.
And they do this a lot. Remember, they flew supplies to Haiti. They picked up masks in China.
For Massachusetts. Working with Governor Baker.
At the beginning, the Boston Renegades, the women's football team in town, he has lent his plane to them both the last 2 times, I think, that they have gone to the Super Bowl. He's actually very quietly, very active.
That's what I was going to say about
with
this.
The Boston Renegades. He doesn't make a big show of it, but they've done some pretty cool things with that women's football team. And Robert Kraft is, to his credit, very enthusiastic and dedicated to advancing that league and that team in particular, and giving women more of an advantage and more of a footprint in football.
I mean, think about how much it matters to those families, by the way. As you said, these stories I read, the vast majority of these kids couldn't afford a plane ticket. 3 of them, much less, even one of them to begin with, and how much it means to them and the families of the 3 kids who were killed.
A football team in college, I think, is oftentimes upwards of 80 kids plus
staff. Could be 100 people.
Yeah, and to do that, yes, Mr. Robert Kraft does a lot of things just out of the goodness of his heart. And honestly, they did not announce this. It should also be noted that they didn't make a show of this. They didn't put out a press release. It was only noticed because a journalist covering the team happened to see the plane at the airport. Otherwise, we never even would have known it happened. That to me is also an incredible part of the story, because so many wealthy people and philanthropic individuals do things so they can tell everyone about it, and they chose not to. It was only afterwards that someone asked them about it.
Now, speaking of the clock, we have about 3 minutes left, but I want to know about this girls' soccer, elite girls' soccer, with men in charge at almost every level.
So my 12-year-old niece loves soccer. This article really caught my eye, and I immediately texted my sister and I said, "Does Elena play on this ECL, whatever team it is, ECNL in Wisconsin?" She does not. But it's a whole article about how, they're trying to change the culture in women's soccer, and in particular in women's collegiate and professional soccer, after everything that happened with the NWSL, where 2 coaches were fired. Sexual harassment and assault has run rampant. Women have often felt like they they owe something to their male coach or their male general manager, whoever's running or owning the team. And so this article delves a little deeper into how they're trying to create these systemic changes at the professional level, but the real problem is at the youth level, that all of these youth soccer clubs and that this ECNL is sort of like where colleges and the U.S. national team go to find the best players. Like, it's a tryout. It's way above like AAU basketball. Like, apparently it's highly competitive. It takes travel team to the next level, and it is predominantly the girls' teams are predominantly run by men, male coaches, male coaching operations managers, male general managers,
men who treat the women like crap.
And then they don't allow for the advancement of female coaches. So a female coach is constantly belittled in front of people. Sexual comments are made to her. You're silenced, and when you are promoted, it's sort of like a promotion in name only. And then they ask you, they'll give you a bunch of really good 8-year-olds to mold into good players, and then once they're 12 or 13 and they start to round into form, when they are going to start getting, sounds crazy, but recruited by colleges and looked at by private high schools or higher elite teams, they pass those off to male coaches who are their buddies and their friends. And so I did ask my sister, I said, is Elena's coach, is it a male or a female? And she said a male, and I sent an eye-rolling emoji. And she did say, though, that the coaching director for her club team is a female. So the female is in charge of that entire club program. She chooses who the coaches are, and that this guy really is truly qualified. He played soccer in college. I guess he had some semi-pro experience, and the girls really do learn a lot from him. He's one of the girls' dads, and that there's a very rigorous process to make sure they're okay. But it's just another example, Jim, of, you talk about all the time, why are men always coaching women instead of the other way around?
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Trenny Casey.
Good to see you.
You too, guys. See you next
Anchor
week.
and reporter for NBC Sports Boston. Thanks a lot, Trenny, for coming in. Coming up, retired federal judge Nancy Gertner joins us to discuss Jack Smith, special counsel for 2 high-profile criminal investigations into former President Donald Trump, and what comes next. We're also going to talk about a controversial investigation involving Samuel Alito on the Supreme Court. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH.
You're listening to Boston Public Radio with Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. Just ahead, more smart conversation about what's going on in our community. That's right after an NPR news break, here on GBH News 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you. And New England Dental Group, committed to helping you stop hiding your smile by offering a variety of dental implant solutions to replace missing teeth in one of their 8 locations. Learn more at newenglanddentalgroup.com. Every story has its twists and turns, so let the PBS NewsHour set the record straight. Get the facts you need from America's most trusted news source. Don't miss the PBS NewsHour, weeknights at 6 on GBH2.
Trusted. Local. News. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you.
Ahead on Boston Public Radio, we're at the Boston Public Library today. Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed a special counsel, Jack Smith, to investigate former President Trump for hoarding classified documents and inciting an insurrection. Trump responded, of course, by trashing Smith. We'll talk to retired federal judge Nancy Gertner about what this new appointment tells us about the potential for indictment, plus how Trump's newly announced re-election bid could complicate things.
34 shows in 24 days. We'll talk about this season of Holiday Pops with Boston Pops conductor Keith Lockhart, who joins us here at the Boston Public Library. Then it's Boston Globe columnist Marcela Garcia on questions of tuition aid for undocumented immigrants and whether she ought to put her delinquent gangster golden retriever puppy on Prozac. CNN's John King will zoom in for the latest out of D.C. Then your takes on the dreaded annual ritual, workplace holiday parties. The do's, the don'ts, your fondest or wildest memories, and what could get you fired. All that ahead on Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. President Biden this morning convened a meeting at the White House with congressional leaders from both parties to sort through the agenda for what's known as the lame duck session of Congress. As NPR's Tamara Keith reports, there's a big to-do list and not much time to do it before the end of the year.
Republicans take control of the House in January, meaning this is the final sprint to the finish to fund the government and pass bipartisan legislation before the balance of power shifts. Biden just added another item to the agenda, calling on Congress to help avoid a freight rail strike.
And Congress, I think, has to act to prevent it. It's not an easy call, but I think we have to do it. The economy is at risk.
Biden asked Congress to pass legislation to impose a tentative agreement between railroad workers and operators, even though some of the unions have rejected the proposed contract. He also said he's hopeful for bipartisan action to fund the government, Ukraine, and COVID vaccines and treatments. Tamara Keith, NPR News, the White House.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is the defendant in a federal case being heard today in a courtroom in Tallahassee. NPR's Greg Allen says Tampa's former state's attorney is suing the governor, alleging DeSantis violated his free speech rights when he suspended him from elected office.
DeSantis, a Republican, ordered Democrat Andrew Warren removed from his position as state attorney in August, saying he was concerned about pledges Warren signed that he would not prosecute cases involving either abortion or transgender health care. Warren sued the governor, saying the pledges he signed were protected speech and that by suspending him, the governor had violated his First Amendment rights. Warren says that his office had no cases pending involving either abortion or transgender health care and that the governor ousted him for political reasons. DeSantis is not expected to testify at the trial. His lawyers say the governor removed Warren for incompetency because he refused to enforce state law. Greg Allen, NPR News, Miami.
The Supreme Court will hear arguments today in a long-running dispute over how to enforce immigration laws. The Biden administration wants to set guidelines for who can be arrested and deported, but several states, including Texas, argue that such guidelines prevent immigration authorities from doing their jobs. NPR's Joel Rose describes what's at stake.
This case has big implications for immigration policy. If the lower court ruling is upheld, advocates fear it will pave the way for immigration authorities to arrest and detain more immigrants, even those without criminal records. But it could also have implications for this idea of prosecutorial discretion itself. I talked to one former Homeland Security official. She says every law enforcement agency needs to exercise discretion about how to use its limited resources.
NPR's Joel Rose. The Conference Board reports U.S. consumer confidence has fallen for a second straight month amid inflation and tech layoff announcements. Wall Street at this hour, the Dow down 96. This is NPR News in Washington.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro in Brookline. Massachusetts Governor-elect Maura Healey met privately yesterday with House Speaker Rod Mariano. The meeting of the two Democrats at the State House was so they could get a working relationship underway and to see if their plans for the state are on the same page. No details of the meeting were released, and it's still unclear how their agendas will play out once she gets in office. Boston is trying to get a better handle on trash disposed by major venues. The city council says that venue employees don't have the capacity to sort trash and separate out recyclables, and that means most of their waste ends up going to landfills and incinerators, leading to more air pollution. The council held a hearing on the issue yesterday. Among those who testified was Michelle Guiney of G-Force Waste, who pitched her organization as possible solution.
We're looking at reducing your trash, which reduces your trash disposal costs. And then in addition to that, of course, is a plethora of other benefits.
Boston officials say cutting down on waste that ends up in landfills and incinerators is an important part of the city's environmental strategy. In sports, the Bruins host Tampa Bay at the Garden tonight. World Cup, it's anyone's guess what will happen this afternoon when the USA and Iran take to the pitch at World Cup soccer. That game starts at 2, and Qatar, by the way, was just bounced from the World Cup in a 2-0 loss to the Netherlands. It's mostly cloudy today, mid-40s. We're at 40 degrees in Boston right now. I'm Henry Santoro, GBH News 89.7.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the George Gund Foundation, working to make Cleveland and Northeast Ohio more globally competitive, livable, sustainable, and just. More information available at gundfdn.org.
He's Jim Browdy. I am Marjorie Egan. You are listening to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live as we do every Tuesday and every Friday from the Boston Public Library. And we are streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News. Hello again, Jim.
Hello again, Marjorie. We're joined now in our studio at the Boston Public Library for another edition of On the Docket with Nancy Gertner. Judge Gertner is a retired federal judge, senior lecturer at Harvard Law School, and a BPR contributor. Judge Gertner, good to see you.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming in, Judge Gertner. So let's start with this investigation into Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito.
Investigation.
Well, it's sort of. And the New York Times did an investigation.
Oh, they
I think.
did.
Yes.
They did, right.
The New York Times did an investigation. The Supreme Court really didn't. But in any case, people may remember that Burwell versus Hobby Lobby case back in 2014. That basically allowed private companies to claim a religious exemption so they wouldn't have to cover birth control and the Obamacare thing. They had these poor nuns. They dragged these poor sisters into this whole mess. And the Supreme Court has now defended Samuel Alito against these allegations made by the New York Times that he leaked this decision, or his wife leaked this decision to this couple that then leaked it to this anti-abortion crusader. They've defended him. The senators, including Sheldon Whitehouse, who want some more accountability for the Supreme Court, aren't happy with just saying, well, he didn't do it. But what do you make of this?
Well, it wasn't an investigation. What happened was that they essentially asked Samuel Alito and said, hey, did you do it? And he said no. And that was the end of it. But the broader question here about, which Senator Whitehouse talks about sustained campaigns to give perks to Supreme Court justices so that they will be on your side, is an interesting and troubling thing. I was thinking this morning about the efforts that we all took, we being federal judges took, to make sure that you weren't in the same room with someone who was, litigating a case in front of you, or that you didn't stand next to an advocate who was advocating for a position in your court. We literally bent ourselves out of shape, and I mean all the judges. And then to wind up with a situation like this, where the allegation is that this couple was giving money to the Supreme Court Historical Society. No problem there. And that gave them access to the justices for dinner, for special seating. It would be one thing if these were just buddies as opposed to advocates. And that's the problem. Now, there probably is not anything illegal about what was done, not the leaking, but the fraternizing with and the camaraderie.
Is it illegal to leak?
Leaking. Well,
that's illegal? Probably not.
Well, the problem is that the ethical rules around the Supreme Court are sort of spongy.
But you mentioned Senator Whitehouse. He was on TV with me last week. He has a new book called The Scheme. He's going to be with us on the radio on December 6th. And by the way, if you didn't see him during the Kavanaugh, all these other hearings where he has a little whiteboard where he does a tutorial on dark money, buying Supreme Court seats for people and decisions. Here he is, and we were talking last week about the Supreme Court's response to a letter. This is before the statement the other day that Judge Gertner was mentioning, that he wrote to the Chief Justice inquiring as to whether right-wing organizations were whining and dining Justice Alito to get info on court decisions. Here's what the senator said.
And we got an extremely bland reply from a court official back saying, we have a code of ethics. So when this broke, we wrote back to them and said, hey, you really need to answer our questions. Saying that we have a code of ethics doesn't answer the question of whether it was broken. And it certainly doesn't solve the problem of a court that has no inquiry, no place where complaints can be lodged, no fact-finding, no determination, and no reporting as to what the outcome was as regards ethics concerns.
I have two things I want to say about this. And again, he'll be with us on the radio on December 6th. You should get his book. It's great. It's called The Scheme. I'm going to channel Marjorie Egan. We've done this with you a number of times. They write this phony, we asked Alito, and he said he didn't do it.
Right.
That's a good investigation. What's the status? Tell us what the status of the investigation is of Ginny Thomas and Clarence Thomas' failure to recuse himself in cases that involved missives from his wife, for example, to the chief of staff of the president. What's that?
What's the status? Nowhere.
Nowhere. There is none. No.
There is none. I was on this White House Commission on the Supreme Court, and one of the things we talked about was, yes, there's a code of ethics that applies to the Supreme Court, but there is no enforcement.
But you have a proposal. That's what I was going to ask you next. part of that commission, the presidential commission, you and Larry Tribe and others sat on, were a bunch of possible solutions. I think I asked Sheldon Whitehouse about this. If not, we'll ask him on the 6th. What did you propose in terms of some sort of ethical oversight body or some such thing?
There were no recommendations from this commission.
Yeah.
But I mean, what was discussed is you could have, for example, a conference of chief justices of all the courts who would sit on ethical violations for the Supreme Court. You could have, three justices, chief justices of other courts that would rotate. Do something. Every other Supreme Court has somebody that is over the Supreme Court to look at ethical violations. No, I don't think that we can say this enough. This is the most powerful Supreme Court in the world, right? Has life tenure, which means, as in a wonderful column by Janelle Bowie this weekend, who said, life tenure was intended to make sure that judges would be independent and be able to exercise judgment independent of public pressure.
And life expectancy was like 38 years or whatever it was.
Right,
then.
but the other side of that coin is the impunity and the impunity of this court. So after overturning Dobbs, they essentially went on a victory tour. Before the Federalist Society, before, went to the Vatican, they went on a victory tour. That is an extraordinary thing for judges to do.
But the other thing is, there was all this hoopla about the leak in the Dobbs decision, right? We're going to get to the bottom of that leak. No hoopla from Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, about this. And from the New York Times, to me, it sounds pretty conclusive. The guy himself, the anti-abortion guy, Schenck, he said he had the information from this couple. He said he shared it with the Hobby Lobby people, and they were contemporaneous emails basically showing, this by the way, has changed his mind about abortion, this guy, Schenck, which made me made me very happy. But he said all these things. I think they've kind of got either Alito or Mrs. Alito. Somebody said it. It seems fairly cut and dry to me, but they're not upset about that. They're only upset about Dobbs, and they're not upset about Mrs. Thomas. So, this whole idea of Roberts that we're worried about the legacy of the court and the reputation of the court just sounds like a bunch of baloney.
Well, you have to sort of tease out, as we should, the essentially what I've been calling 3 days last June, when they reversed the gun law, abortion, narrowed the Environmental Protection Agency regulations, which was a court that is feeling impunity is the only way. We don't care that there were 50, 100 years of precedent. We don't agree. I mean, that's one category which is troubling, and as to which the only counter is to expand the court, to have every judge, to do something about the composition of the court. The ethical issues are really in another box entirely. And it's not just the leak. One could envision a dinner party where someone said, this is going fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And then that's how they knew about the leak of the Dobbs decision was very different and systematic. But what was interesting about the New York Times article to me was not so much the leak, which could have been who knows what, but the sustained campaign to get at these justices. And more than that, their willingness to be part of it. I don't mean part of it in terms of their decisions, but again, I'm talking about what seems like a victory tour. All 4 justices in the majority in Dobbs went to the Federalist Society and got a standing ovation. That would have been unimaginable. I mean, when I was on the bench, you issued a decision, the Globe would love it, ACLU might love it, somebody, but I would never go and, get your congratulations. I was a judge. So the extrajudicial stuff is the part that concerns me.
Can I say 2 things about this before we leave this? Is one, the New York Times story you both referenced, the New York Times says in its stories, it spent months and months vetting this story after Reverend Schenck said to them that this is what happened before they agreed to publish it. And they said they saw enough contemporaneous emails back and forth that they are convinced that Schenck's story is legit, number one. Number two, I hadn't thought of this all the times we discussed this. One of the most gracious people I've ever met and one of the smartest is Margaret Marshall, former Chief Justice of the SJC. You won't remember this, Marjorie, because, whatever. She was on our show, and I asked her a question once that as soon as I said it, I know I'm going to regret this. I said, so when you're at a party with Supreme Court justices, because she was mentioning Ruth Bader Ginsburg or somebody she was hanging out with some night at an event, I said, do you ever look around and say to the justice, so you're deciding the Dobbs decision. Can you just tell? She was so appalled, but polite, I should say, so appalled, even to a chief justice of a state court. She said, this is not, you just don't do this kind of thing, unless, of course, you're being wined and dined. We're talking to Nancy Gertner, retired federal judge, now at Harvard Law School.
So what do you think of this appointment of Jack Smith? He's going to be the overseeing the criminal investigations into Donald Trump. We know what the former president thinks. He says he's a political hitman, and he's compromised and weaponizing the Justice Department, et cetera, et cetera. Radical left prosecutor. He looks like a pretty scary guy to me. From the pictures of him, I wouldn't want to be sitting in front of him. But anyway, what does this mean for the investigations into the former president?
I'm sorry, I have to say this, but could you imagine a more anodyne name in the world?
Jack
than Jack
Smith.
Smith?
I know.
It's like his name is John Doe. Who's going to be the next,
That's right.
But I mean, I think that Garland felt compelled to do it. And it says something about how far advanced, in one sense, the investigation is. Because there would have really been well, maybe I'm wrong about this, but certainly the decision to indict will be politically fraught. The decision to decline will also be politically fraught, but not as much. And so I think that this was a way, and I think he felt compelled to do this because, Trump had just announced, I take him at his word that he felt compelled to take this step because Trump was announcing to be a presidential candidate, and Biden was making moves like that, and the statute says extraordinary circumstances. The concern that Larry Tribe and I and others expressed is that this is an investigation that's been going on for some time.
Yeah.
If the special prosecutor here does what Mueller did, and you got 2 years from now, you'll be in the middle of a presidential election and nothing will happen. And Smith, at least, represents that he's not doing that, and from all signs, it looks like he's up to speed.
He takes risks. He takes risks,
Yeah.
I read, and he's prosecuted people where he's failed, including former presidential candidate John Edwards. He prosecuted him and lost.
Right.
So does an attorney general, I know none of the history. We read a little bit about Janet Reno changing from special independent counsel where they make the final decision. Is it likely that a cautious attorney general like Garland, or is there any history that's relevant, would appoint somebody if the direction in which they were going, even if it's slow, was not towards indictment? Can you read anything into that?
Well,
you understand? I don't know if I even...
I think that this is not like Mueller. Mueller is at the beginning of an investigation which could go anywhere.
Right.
This is a well-along investigation, certainly the Mar-a-Lago part, which is pretty, really open and shut. But the January 6th is certainly more complicated. So appointing him at this time feels like he's blessing a prosecution as opposed to investigating it. But who knows?
I understand the extraordinary circumstances. Is that the language in the statute?
That's the language, yeah.
The thing I don't understand, which has almost gotten buried here, is people are acting, and I hope I'm right factually about this, you'll correct me if I'm not, is that he's delegating the decision-making here to the special prosecutor. He's not.
He's not.
He's delegating the investigation.
Right.
At the end of the day, Jack Smith, John Doe, comes back to Merrick Garland and says he should be indicted for X or he should not be indicted. Garland has he has the ultimate power to overrule either decision, to indict or not to indict.
That's right.
So ultimately, he's making the decision,
That's right. In the ordinary course, there would have been senior Justice Department officials who would be looking at this and making a recommendation to Garland. This is a situation of someone who is outside, sort of another view, but he's making the ultimate decision.
I think most people know that before and after your judgeship, you're a pretty big-time criminal defense lawyer. So the question I wanted to ask you, if I ever get in trouble. Donald Trump said
Do you have my card?
I do have your card, actually, and you're on my speed dial. Donald Trump had an interesting response to the appointment of Jack Smith. He said, I quote, will not partake. So if somebody is investigating me criminally, and I'm worried about going to jail, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you never know what could happen. Is it a decent defense for me to say publicly, I will not partake in this proceeding? Can I do that?
It's like describing it like he's not going to eat Thanksgiving dinner. It's not a response. But then
I will not partake.
I will not partake. He just learned the word, I think.
It was Nancy Gertner that said that, for those who care about impartiality here on the show. We're talking to Nancy Gertner, retired. By the way, he did say, I will not partake. That is not intended as a joke. That was the immediate response to the appointment of Smith.
And he also attacked Smith's wife for her ties to the Democratic Party. Now that's really very interesting. So in the context of the Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas stuff, someone who is contributing to the Hillary Clinton, who's I guess it was a film, or she was the producer of the film.
Michelle Obama.
Michelle Obama. You're right. That's right. And I mean, that's one thing that you generally can't get either judges or lawyers that are essentially have been, on ice for years. Everybody will tilt in one direction. You want someone who's engaged. Isn't that different than Ginny Thomas being on the January 6th insurrection?
It's different, but I'm glad you brought that. I couldn't read my writing, and now I'm glad you brought it up. One of the articles, I think in the New York Times, Margie and I read, said one of the reasons Garland picked him beyond his experience as a war prosecutor and a war crimes prosecutor, in addition to everything else, is that he was an independent, not a Democrat or registration. But then they mentioned the thing about the wife. And assuming it's not just the skill of the man or woman chosen, but also how clean he or she is, if you're concerned about political impact, would you have been, if you were the Attorney General, which you might have been, had Hillary Clinton been President of the United States, if you were the Attorney General, would that give you pause in terms of an appointment when you're worried about the politics, or would it not?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, it's a balancing test. Here's the guy who, the appointment of Smith is someone with unbelievable credentials who's been nothing but a prosecutor, not even working in a private firm for one side or another. And, it's a good thing that we are married to people who have lives. And the only exception, this is a terrible thing to say, but of course I'll say it. I mean, there were I always wondered about judges male judges whose wives didn't work, and there were a lot of male judges like that, and how they then feel about all the cases coming before them, all the employment discrimination cases coming before them. In one sense, Ginny Thomas may be unique in the degree of her activism, but it's beyond just working for a cause. The issue with Ginny Thomas was that her text messages to Meadows were likely in the box of documents that were at issue in one of the Supreme Court.
That he didn't want to turn over, that he voted, he was the lone dissenter.
Right.
Also, we should say the Jack Smith thing with his wife, it isn't like, I don't know, let me make up a hypothetical. It isn't like a nominated judge for a federal judge has a husband who's legal head of the ACLU or something. You know what I mean? I mean, that would be ridiculous.
That would be ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, but you've talked about this before, though.
Never met her.
But you've talked about this before, how you had to handle those cases when you were a judge and your husband was a big deal with the ACLU. What'd you do?
We drew a circle around my court. He literally didn't come in. The
Is
ACLU,
that true?
Yes.
Is that really true?
I don't remember him ever in my courtroom even. And the ACLU could not participate in any case, even as a friend of the court.
Well, what if you had a case and you didn't know if an amicus brief was going to be filed? What'd you do?
Well, I would. That would be this. I would disqualify myself.
Really?
I would
I didn't know that.
He used to tell clients who would come in and say, "I have a case pending in federal court," and there's one case in particular, and he would say to the person, "Who's the judge?" And if you say Gertner, he'd say, "Okay, you either choose me or her. You can't have both." You can't have both. And it was, and that's what I'm saying. The Ginny Thomas stuff is extraordinary and speaks more to the impunity of the court than anything else.
Well, it's very sad. It's very sad because you kind of thought until recently, at least I did, that, Congress may screw up, but at least the Supreme Court would sort of eventually, in most cases, get it right. And now I've lost complete faith in them. It's really a sad state of affairs.
Well, it's interesting. I wasn't focusing on the ethical issues, although we need to focus on that. I've always focused on expanding the court in order to change to have other voices on the court, because with a 6-3 majority, these guys don't have to deal with anyone other than themselves. Now I'm wondering that expanding a court that has no ethical rules, or doesn't have enforceable ethical rules is the way to put it, will be very troubling. What's the point of expanding a court that is as lawless in terms of its own governance as this court is? And
well, I guess I'd answer that question with far less expertise than yours, is that even if you didn't expand it enough to restore a reasonable balance, at minimum, expanding it enough to deal with a stolen seat, namely Obama's nomination of Garland, is not shouldn't be seen as a radical act. It's in response to what people like you and Larry Tribe say. They're the ones who packed the court,
Right.
not the Democrats who are
Right.
contemplating doing it.
But it is true that the organization of the court needs to change, because it could be, not only Republicans have ethical lapses, Democrats do. So it's clear that this is a court that needs lots of change on a number of fronts.
I know people are probably sick of this, but I'm sorry, I can't get enough of this Ginny Thomas thing. If we can just stay for one more minute. Do you know Roberts, by the way, personally, or do you not?
I've met him.
Okay. If you are concerned, and I think he is, as I'm assuming any Chief Justice is, I was going to say his or her legacy, but obviously there hasn't been a her yet, but on the Supreme Court, at least, of the U.S., his legacy, it's got to bother him that in the second paragraph or third paragraph of his retirement story or his obituary is the thing that he just left hanging that I think every objective person, assuming there are any objective people left in America, but an objective person would say is grotesque and at minimum deserves a thorough investigation. I mean, he's got to know that too, right?
He's going to know that, and I think that Sheldon Whitehouse has really done a great service by throwing down the gauntlet. It's one thing for you and I to scream and yell about it. Here's a senator writing a letter saying there has to be some transparency, and the transparency here could have been, we have investigated, we are investigating, we have appointed X. Silence is not a sufficient response in these days.
By the way, White House is on the Judiciary Committee, if people are not aware.
Mr. Timekeeper over there, do we have time for Donald Trump's taxes?
We do
or
indeed.
do we not?
We do.
We have time for Trump's taxes.
Richard Neal, we're supposed to say powerful Richard Neal up there, the congressman.
We're in stoppage time, unfortunately. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Okay. Has been trying to get the president's taxes since 2019. People probably know that the Manhattan DA has some of them, and Letitia James, the Attorney General in New York, has some of them for cases that they're aiming at the president. But these are more recent taxes, and I think there's the possibility that these taxes could become public. So what do you make of this?
Well, the only answer to that is it's about time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's about time. When you look at the investigations of Trump, there's even if he doesn't get indicted, even doesn't get convicted, there's certainly things that were troubling in his tax returns. And the notion that whereas every other president has disclosed them and he hasn't, and that it has taken 6 years to get them, is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. I mean, I think that I think the Supreme Court finally, did the right thing by ordering the tax returns to go to the House.
9-0.
Right.
What'd you make of that it was 9-0?
Well, it's interesting.
Even Clarence.
People,
Even Clarence.
People talk about how, maybe this court is much more moderate than it appears on first glance and much more free of influence than appears on first glance, looking at cases like this. But this was clear.
Yeah.
There was no ambiguity here. If it had been anything but 9-zip, it would have been troubling. So, I mean, I think that...
One might argue Roe v. Wade was clear, too.
I know.
Would you not?
Yeah.
Isn't it odd that the tax preparers, is Mazar, or however you pronounce it,
Mazars,
Mazar, that they prepared Trump's tax returns, but then later disavowed their accuracy?
They don't want to go to jail.
That's an unusual situation.
It's unusual because they could no longer count on the information they had been given. In other words, I thought that they were trying to split the baby a little bit here and say, our calculations are in one category, but we don't know if the information we've been given is accurate. And that's, of course, what's being litigated in the New York courts.
And that's not their obligation to necessarily find that out. Okay.
No. They're not an independent investigator. They have to take the taxpayer in good faith and then make the calculations. I suppose if something was obviously wrong, it would be different. But I don't know whether that's the case.
Before we leave this topic, you were mentioning to me this morning when we were preparing for this, and you just mentioned Judge Gertner, the possibility of Chairman Neal from Springfield releasing the taxes
leaking,
before
something like that.
The Republicans take over control of the committee in January. We have almost all. Forget Letitia James and whatever is Alvin Bragg.
Bragg.
The Manhattan DA. Almost everything was released in the New York Times. Most people think thanks to Mary Trump, his niece, and the litigation there. And you read this thing. I think it won a Pulitzer Prize, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure. And you see the even if technically legal, and I'm not sure it all was, manipulation to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars Trump did. Did anybody care? It was like a blip on a screen.
Well, part of it is and others who know more about this than I, is that there's so much with Trump that it becomes
Exactly right.
You become immunized to it. It's like it becomes a version of what he said when he ran the first time. I could shoot someone in Times Square because we've just been immunized. And the people who are listening are still listening, and the people who've stopped listening long ago have stopped listening long ago.
So before you go, did that client choose the ACLU or Judge Gertner? Who'd they choose?
They couldn't find a lawyer. They were going to go. They were going to get another lawyer, and they couldn't find anyone in town who would represent them. So in fact, the case was lost.
Oh,
yeah, but
wow.
I mean, but we were, I wouldn't tell him what I was working on. Now, of course, as I've mentioned before on the show, that didn't stop him from ripping the hell out of me after a decision was issued. So I was driving home from work with him one day, and he said, "Did you just dismiss so-and-so in this case?" I go, "Yes, I did." He said, "Well, you are totally wrong." But the decision was out, and I wasn't going to touch it.
Got it.
So, I mean, one of the things I actually was concerned about as a federal judge was that we were so concerned about running into an advocate or being in a conference where we would be compromised that made us more and more insular and less of the community. Now I'm wondering whether, that would have been much better for the Supreme Court to become more and more insular. It's quite extraordinary.
You're right. Great to see you.
I'm glad somebody's got some ethics around here. That's all I can say. Thank you very much, Judge Gertner, for being with us. We appreciate it. Nancy Gertner is a retired federal judge and senior lecturer at Harvard Law School and a BPR contributor, and we're very glad she is. Coming up, the Boston Holiday Pops kicks off their season this Thursday night. Conductor Keith Lockhart joins us next to tell us what's going to go on in this year's Holiday Pops. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News.
Longtime residents across Boston are facing increasing rents and uncertain futures.
We're seeing extreme price pressure from entities who are only thinking about profit.
But there are groups empowering them to take a stand.
Organizing is the way that our communities have to push back against the crisis of displacement.
I'm Stephanie Lydon. The latest in our series, Priced Out, Thursday on GBH's Morning Edition.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, offering Medicare Advantage plans with new benefits like enhanced dental coverage, as well as a broad network of doctors, hospitals, and specialists. BlueCrossMA.com/go. And Boston Ballet, presenting The Nutcracker. Dare to dream big with New England's favorite holiday tradition. You can gather with family and friends to see it live at the Citizens Bank Opera House now through December 31st. Tickets at bostonballet.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Marjorie Egan, live from the Boston Public Library, streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News. This Thursday marks the first performance in a holiday season staple around Boston, the Holiday Pops. 34 shows in 24 days. Joining us now to discuss is conductor of the Pops, Keith Lockhart. Keith, it is wonderful to see you. Welcome.
Hi, guys. Hi, Jim.
How are you?
Hey, everybody.
Do you have to go into a special pre-holiday Pops workout mode to get through 34 concerts?
It's called Thanksgiving. Sleeping and eating.
Yeah, sleeping and eating.
By the way, just let me say, this is the first time I've been back in this space since December of 19. So,
is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
So,
wow.
How great is that?
It's a great space, isn't it?
Open
Yeah, it's a great space. It's a beautiful space. We're so lucky to be here. It's fantastic. So give us a hint. What's going to go on this season?
Oh, wow. Great stuff, of course. This is my 27th of these.
Wow.
That's even not counting the one we missed in 2020. And what we've really tried for, it's amazing how people have responded to this concert and how it's become kind of central to so many people's celebration of this season. And what we try really carefully to do is make this a tradition, make it feel familiar, because God knows all of us need something these days when the world seems to flip upside down every week or so, that you can reach out and go, oh, thank God, at least that's still there. But that having been said, to make it new, with new stories to be told, new songs to be sung, new ways of celebration, more indication of how things are celebrated around the world that will bring people back each year to find out what we're doing new.
Give us some of the new things that you are drawing in from around the world, and then we'll talk about some of the great staples.
Well, the people who come to Holiday Pops on a regular basis know one thing we like to do is tell holiday stories. We tell them with the full weight and majesty of the Boston Pops and the Tanglewood Festival Chorus and narrators, and now our wonderful multimedia capabilities as well. If you've seen our version of The Christmas Story, it features the beautiful artwork of Tommy DePaula,
Yes.
who's just was an angelic, very famous children's book author and illustrator who lived in New Hampshire and died at the beginning of the COVID lockdown, but of non-COVID related causes in his late 80s. And Tommy was a real friend of the organization, and when he was showing us all his books, and he said, you know, would you be interested in this one? He showed me this beautiful book that he'd written. All through his life, he was inspired by the folk art of Mexico. He was not Mexican himself, but he spent a lot of his time living in Mexico and the American Southwest studying this, and a lot of his painting is infused with it. So he had a story about Las Posadas, the Mexican and other Latin American countries' Christmas tradition. I don't know if you know, do you know the tradition?
No.
I do not.
Basically, a young couple from the village are picked to play Maria and Jose, Mary and Joseph, and for 9 whole days, representing the 9 months of Mary's pregnancy, culminating on Christmas Eve, they travel from house to house in the village, asking for shelter, asking to be let in so that Mary can give birth. And initially, in all of these days, they're refused. Devils pop out and scorn them. They say they're poor, they're destitute, don't let them in your house, that sort of thing. Eventually, each night, they are welcomed. And the party, when they are welcomed, gets bigger and bigger till the one on December 24th, which is huge piñatas and bonfires and chocolates and all that sort of thing. And the funny thing about that tradition is it's very heartwarming, but it focuses on something that I never really focused on as, you know, a lifelong raised in the church and all that. That little line about there was no room for them in the inn.
Yeah.
And it really struck me that this, as in a lot of under pressure communities that don't have those kind of resources, housing insecurity, which is not the term they would have used, is a real thing. And they really think that it's remarkable that somebody actually opened their heart enough to accept this poor couple in. That's their first takeaway.
So, and you're also doing Ukrainian carols. Am I not right about that?
Right. One of which you know really well.
I do?
Yes. Probably don't know it in Ukrainian, but
which one is it?
Yum ba ba bum bum ba ba bum bum ba ba bum bum ba ba bum. The Carol of the Bells, also known as the Ukrainian Bell Carol. Really, really famous worldwide, was actually brought to this country in 1922 by the Ukrainian National Chorus. That's one everybody knows, but we're also doing another one that's more from a Ukrainian wassail tradition, where groups travel from house to house and say, hey, you know, it's celebration time, so where's the food and drink for us? They're starting with that in Ukrainian, and then Carol of the Bells in English.
You know, Keith Lockhart, we're talking to Keith Lockhart. Obviously, the Boston Pops Christmas concerts start December 1st, run through the 24th. You can get tickets at bostonpops.org. There's also a streaming component, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. Before we do, though, I say this to you almost every year we talk about this, and Marjorie knows this to be true. I'm not exactly a fun kind of guy. But I admit it.
You always sell yourself short.
Well,
He does.
True.
He really does.
But I have to say, these concerts are so much fun, even for the likes of
You
me.
were smiling. I saw it.
Well, not only smiling, I was smiling briefly. I was making sure. But, you know, you had a great quote in some piece I read in the last couple of days where you said, I'm one of them, people who would never think, I'm paraphrasing, of singing in public around Christmas time, let it loose. Was that, you said something like that,
They
right?
do, and that's one of the big symbolic things about this year, actually, is that we're bringing back the sing-along. We didn't do it last year because there was so much residual
because of people's breaths
concern about everybody doing aerosols simultaneously. we still recommend masks, but as you know, I think most of it at this point are trying to move on with our lives in one way or another.
So do you have fun? I mean, so I'm talking about from the audience perspective. It is huge. It is colossal fun. Do you have fun doing it, or is it work?
I do. I mean, it's both, actually. Yeah. You know, it's hard. I'll be honest, when you do in like 60 hours, 8 concerts, that does resemble work.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
But I have to say, it is such a joyous thing. It's really amazing. And everybody in the orchestra, even the grumpiest, know that. I mean, to see how people respond and how much it means to people is really kind of why we're all performers.
It would seem the only upside you mentioned before that you get out of some Christmas duties because you have 34 concerts in 24 days.
Except that, I have like 3 carefully, strategically placed nights off between now and December 24th.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Just Mondays. We're just not doing. We've reduced our schedule slightly, and so those days become the buy the tree day, the decorate the tree day, the who's climbing on the roof with the lights day, and all those
But
things.
you don't have to worry, all the trees are gone, so you don't have to worry about anything. But one last thing, by the way, about scheduling. In addition to all the concerts at Symphony Hall, you do, is it 4 on the road?
It's 4 on the road.
And where do you go again?
We're starting in Worcester on December 2nd, and then stores at UConn on December 3rd. The next week, we'll see us in Manchester. And the week after that, in Lowell at the Memorial Auditorium.
And our buddy Lisa Graham and the Metropolitan Chorale are part of that deal, too, and they're fabulous.
So give us the history of holiday pops. How'd this come about?
Well, the funny thing is that everybody thinks this is an ancient tradition. They're really, historically in the calendar of the BSO, there was no winter pop season. There was only the spring pop season in May and June and other touring sorts of things. And then I think probably because of one of Arthur Fiedler's incredibly successful holiday albums, they started to say, well, we're really missing an opportunity here to be doing concerts in that week. And they started off with 3 or 4 concerts in 1 week, right around Christmas time. And that expanded a little bit during John Williams' tenure. But even my first year here, I think we did maybe 17 concerts in total. And by 2019, which was kind of the max peak before we pulled everything back for a little while, I've done as many as 52.
Wow. Wow. Because the demand
But I was younger then.
Yeah, because the demand is so huge.
It's really, really grown. And we have these the coolest thing, I actually have people come up with families, 2 little kids adorably dressed in holiday, in their holiday finest, and they come up and they say, we'd like to have a picture with you, and we'd like to show you this picture. And it's a picture of one of the parents as a little kid with their parents at my concert, which makes me both feel incredibly warm
and incredibly old.
Incredibly old, exactly.
So the best arrangement of the 12 Days of Christmas I've ever heard has been at your Holiday Pops concerts. Can you do it this year, or do you have to mix it up a little bit?
No, we do have to mix it up a little bit, but there are certain pieces that if we pull them out at this point, it's one of those pieces, it's a mixed blessing, because you look at it and you go, wow, this is amazing. And you go, oh, I'm going to have to do this every single year. But we would, as I say about Sleigh Ride, if we did not do those pieces, we would be buried with a stake of holly through our heart.
Yeah.
So what are the other staples that, for people who haven't been here before, what are the other staples that will continue, even with the additions you talked about a minute ago, Keith Lockhart?
Well, the sing-along, of course, is a big one. The 12 Days of Christmas, Leroy Anderson's Sleigh Ride, a wonderful visit by the most wonderful guy in the world. We have a great relationship. Large, wears a red suit. And I should tell you that Santa is bringing something this year that nobody's going to believe.
Yeah,
we're knocking down. No more. No groaners from Santa this time. Just
give us a little hint.
Can't.
Come on, spell
It's
it
like when
backwards.
you ask me for the 4th of July.
I know, and you always tell us you're going to call
Jim.
us before you announce it, and you never do. And by the way, there's another thing.
Everybody asks for a scoop.
I know. I don't care about everybody else. We're talking about us. Now, Keith Lockhart, I want you to know, and also there's a great recitation, if that's the right word, of the 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, beautiful poem.
Which you two have done.
Well,
Yes,
not
we
only have
have.
we done, I did a little survey with Marjorie's permission of 100 critics in town, and the consensus was the most legendary recitation
absolutely.
was in 2016. Do you know who did it in 2016?
Jim Browdy and Marjorie.
That would be right. Here's a little bit of that incredible moment. Here it is.
'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse.
The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there.
The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads.
And Mama in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled down for a long winter's nap. Okay, let's hear it for those two incredible
And you know,
Bravo.
we have
bravo.
these
Thank you very much.
ridiculous antlers on our head with these lights flashing at
I
the
thought
end.
you pulled them off really. I thought they looked good.
Well, thank you.
Can I tell
Jim
you
brought
something?
them, and Jim was a nervous
I
wreck.
got chills.
Jim was a nervous wreck, you
I
know.
was honest to God, we're sitting in the conductor's, whatever it is, room, and we're rehearsing beforehand. You were cool as a cucumber. I was sweating buckets about, and then we get out there. I don't know if you remember this. Mark Volpe, your former boss, said afterwards it was the first R-rated comment ever. I come out and I made some comments about balls. And I made Christmas balls, and unfortunately it came out the wrong way.
You sound like a Saturday Night Live.
Exactly, but I'm bummed. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, so many people, so many different backgrounds have read 'Twas the Night with the Orchestra over the years, and some of them have been hundreds, yeah, probably thousands if you go back before me. But there have been some very special ones, and you guys are definitely in the special ones.
Haven't there been a couple of mishaps along the way?
There have been some of which aren't really repeatable.
Yeah. Maybe you could leave out the name and just tell us what happened.
One I can tell you, there was a famous restaurateur in town who had just kind of started to his career had taken a little bit of a bump because of some allegations, and he came to a classic point in the thing and said, and turned into a jerk.
Oh no!
A little self-awareness action, or what?
There was, and Dom DeLuise joined the orchestra in Syracuse to speak on tour once, and he said, I met him and I said, Mr. Louise, it's an honor. And he said, Keith, I've respected this orchestra he said, you don't have to worry about me. I'm going to totally play it straight. So he walks out on stage, total family show. I think it was even a matinee. Walks out on stage, insults the bald-headed violinist on the corner as he comes around, the late, great Jim Orant, walks into the center of the stage, tells a Viagra joke.
Oh, God. Oh, no.
Now that's good for
And then proceeded to do the worst reading ever. So it was...
Is he dead?
Yep.
Oh, okay. That's why
I can see...
That's not connected.
But you can see where you could have a stage fright issue, right? If you're not a professional performer, and you get out there in front of all these people and the lights and the orchestra, and you might just
We're theoretically professional some things, and I was terrified. I mean, totally. And what you do for those, everybody's seen this, everybody's been there. Keith talks to you on the stage for a couple
That's
seconds.
right.
And it's obviously to calm you down if you're nervous like I am. And it didn't do the trick, my friend. Let me tell you.
I've got to change my pre-show delivery. Usually I just say something like, don't screw up.
Well, you were kind of that. Can you also talk about something you instituted a couple years ago, which I just love? I think it's happening on December 3rd. The sensory-friendly kind of thing.
Yes.
What do you do and why do you do it?
December 3rd, 10 o'clock. We started it in 2019, and then that tradition, like so many, was cut abruptly. We brought it back last year. There were several people who were very tuned into this in the BSO organization who were pushing on us hard to do it. And so when we decided to do it, we talked to a lot of experts, but it wasn't just doctors. The sensory-friendly concerts welcome people on the autism spectrum, but also with a host of various disorders that make it difficult for them to interact with the world the way the rest of us would. We talked to parents, we talked to advocates, we said, what kind of thing do you need? And we heard all the basic things. The basic things are no real sharp edges on the concert, no incredibly big, sudden blackouts. No, we took out some of the very loudest things, especially some of the surprise loudest things, because those are the things that made people with those sorts of issues react badly, And then, but the big thing they said, and this is what we try to go with, is that it has to be a welcoming, accepting place. They said more than anything, what we need is acceptance as a family for these kids individually. And I had parents come up to me with tears in their eyes, and they said, we have two more normally functioning kids and one kid with this, and we can never do anything as a family because we are always judged from the moment we walk in, because there is and there is some reason for that. But to have a show where you say, if you want to get up and dance at any point, if you want to just walk around the place because the music excites you, if you want to sing along with us at any point that might be considered an inappropriate point in other concerts, it's cool. You are loved, and this is your celebration, and it meant so much to them.
Do you think you guys, I mean, we've talked to you since, I'm careful not to say post-pandemic when you look at the New York Times and you see 300 people still dying every single day.
It may never be post.
Unfortunately,
so
you may be right. But are you different, do you think, in what you do? Are your players different in some ways based upon this unexpected hiatus?
Oh, I think all of us are. I think, in ways that we wear on our sleeve and in ways that are kind of more inner damage. I know one thing is that, maybe I lived in a bubble. I was, I've had a wonderful career doing something that I really, really love and would want to do even if I didn't have to have a career. And to all of a sudden know what it feels like to sit around wondering if that entire industry is gone for over a year. You come back feeling much more fragile and older.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was just coincident. I turned 60 right before, like 3 months before the pandemic. And I don't know if it was just coincident, but all of a sudden I felt like I was 15 years older than I was before it started.
60 is the new 20.
That's
right?
That's what my wife keeps telling me.
Exactly.
But it is different because even now that we're living with COVID and people aren't wearing masks anymore and people are going to more events close by, there is a certain undercurrent even now. I think when you go to the theater or you go to the movies,
you think about things you never thought of before.
Exactly.
All of a sudden, the dystopic, movies have come true, at some extent.
Also, you touch on this before, and we've discussed this before, but I want to do a commercial for this because I love the holiday pop stuff. I've said this to you before, and neither you nor I can remember. I came to see you guys. It wasn't a holiday pops thing. Right after some horrible national and international thing, I was sure the concert was going to be canceled. It wasn't. And I have to say, I know you don't like this to your face, but I'm going to say, you did the most beautiful statement to the audience before it started. It was so soothing and so important and so, healing is probably too strong a word, but it was just beautiful. And considering the state of the world and the mess we're in, to be able to walk in and shut the door and just participate, and you do participate in something that is so joyful, is so needed and so great right now that it's just huge.
It's one of the things that makes them really important, and thank you for your kind words about it. It's part of the job. And when we program these things, we try to think about what are people fixated on, what are they scared of right now. 2 years ago when we did the virtual one, we did a whole home for the holidays thing with our tongue firmly in our cheek because we were all home for the holidays. Last year we did something about community. Of the theme, I sometimes, even if I never express it, I have a theme when I start the program, was we gathered together and we did the big Thanksgiving hymn. The idea that one of the most important things as humans we hadn't been able to do is gather in community. And this year, it's hard to think of which fires to address. There is so much fragmentation and so much apparent hate. But if the holidays stand for anything through every year, it's that there is a ray of hope that we have to remember is there. Otherwise, there's no reason to get up in the morning.
I remember you're talking about having a concert the night of a tragedy. I think it might have been a mass shooting, and how do you go ahead and with the concert? And you address whatever. I'm embarrassed to say I forget what tragedy it was. There have been so many.
There've been several over the years, but I did a concert 3 days after 9/11, and and there was the next holiday pops after 9/11 when that was still pretty fresh.
Did you address it or say anything, or did you just not?
It depends on, you have to think about, what you're doing is trying to create a positive experience. Yep. And there's if something is fresh and there's no way to avoid it as an elephant in the room, I think you have to take it head on and say what you can to help people feel better and commit to where they are. And if it's a few months later, it may be just dredging it back up. Yeah. And then maybe you deal more subtly with what the underlying, lingering fears are.
So I mentioned before, tell people what the streaming deal is this year.
The whole show will be available on the BSO Now site. If you go to bso.org or bostonpops.org, it will tell you about how to, and it's available starting on December 16th, and I think probably for a month after that. But that'll give you still 10 days, 9 days before Christmas.
Okay, so, and before you left, I know you wanted to announce who you're going to have on July 4th. Who is it?
We did, yeah.
So, who is it?
Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan.
Yeah.
It was the night before Christmas.
He harasses all these candidates every year. When are you going to, you're not going to run, you're going to run.
Well, some of them answer the damn
about
question,
20 times.
unlike him.
No, they never answer. Here comes the question.
You know what's
and then
really
they don't
sad
answer.
about this? We're out of
What?
time, so you can't tell us for the 400th time about your introduction to Donald Trump. So we'll have to save that again for next time.
It's just,
is that okay?
That's just getting staler with every repetition.
Well, not for
it's time
me.
to
It
move
isn't,
on
my
to
friend.
a new line.
Yeah.
Keith, we're really excited to see you. We're really excited about the season. December 1st to the 24th, bostonpops.org. We've both been there a ton of times.
Yes, we have.
Do not miss it. It is fabulous.
Thank you very much
Great
for
to see
coming in.
both
We
of you
much
guys.
appreciate
Merry
it.
Christmas, happy holidays.
We've been
Thank you,
speaking
too.
with Boston Pops conductor Keith Lockhart, and again, you can find out more information about Holiday Pop schedule at bso.org. That is bso.org, and if you haven't been, it is just an amazing treat for little kids to like people that are like 90. It's a great evening. Anyway, coming up, Boston Globe columnist Marcela Garcia joins us to discuss a push for tuition equity in Massachusetts by providing in-state college tuition to undocumented workers who went to high school here. We're also going to talk to you about the World Cup and a bunch of other news. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
I'm Arun Roth. Coming up on GBH's All Things Considered, Governor Baker and Governor-elect Healy are giving an update on the state's progress fighting the opioid crisis. People hurt in last week's Apple Store crash in Hingham are filing suit. And Lowell residents are recovering after last night's major water main break. Those stories and all the day's news starting at 4 on GBH's All Things Considered.
Support for our programs comes from you. And the Bach Center, presenting the New England premiere of 'Twas the Night Before by Cirque du Soleil, an acrobatic retelling of a classic tale, playing at the Bach Center Wang Theater November 25th through December 11th. Tickets at bachcenter.org. And City Year. By putting the leadership skills of AmeriCorps mentors to work in public school classrooms, City Year can help students become the people they want to be while building their academic and social strengths. cityyear.org.
Trusted. Local. News. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marjorie Egan and Jim Browdy. We're live at the Boston Public Library, streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News. More than 20 states in the U.S. offer in-state tuition for undocumented students who went to high school there. Why doesn't Massachusetts? Marcela Garcia makes the case that we should do it here in a recent column for the Globe, and she joins us now to discuss this and talk through a bunch of whole other things she's written about lately. Marcela, it's great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for
so
coming.
much.
Yeah, thank you for being here again, Marcela Garcia. So before we get to in-state tuition, you wrote a great piece about the World Cup. America's playing Iran today at 2. We were talking about it with listeners, our conflicted feelings about the World Cup being in Qatar and stuff. But what did you say in your Globe piece?
Well, I should say that I was born and raised in Mexico, where soccer, we call it football, there, it's a religion. But I've never been to a soccer game in my life. And so, as a Mexican...
A religion that you do not participate in.
No, there are other religions, other Mexican religions that I don't participate in. For instance, I don't like hot foods, spicy
really?
foods. I don't like, yeah, I'm not Mexican in that regard either. So, but every 4 years, I get to prove that I am indeed Mexican when the World Cup comes around, and I just like go crazy, all in, totally super nervous. I'm never this nervous, this excited.
You're
whenever
nervous?
I'm watching. Yes, like I get. So the first match of Mexico, they were playing Poland. I was on a plane because I was traveling to Dallas for Thanksgiving, and people on the plane must have thought I was like crazy because I kept doing all of this motions and we drew, it was a tie, but now we're in last place and I think we're going to be eliminated.
Can they get to the knockout round if they win? Do they get to the next round?
They have to win tomorrow against Saudi Arabia by a lot of goals, and it depends on what happens, in the other game.
You know why I loved your column? Because you really captured the essence of what we discussed with listeners at 11 o'clock. The conflict, I don't mean just the fact that you've never been to a football match, is that on one hand, hopefully people of goodwill are concerned about human rights and things, as are you, that are happening there.
Right.
But the flip side, acknowledging the excitement about the games. And I thought that candor was great.
Yeah, I think in general, I'm all for boycotts. Like, I do think that they're a good tool for, affecting change. But in this case, I am able to separate both. And look, there were teams that wanted to boycott the World Cup, and it just didn't happen because soccer is the world's most popular sport for a reason. It's a business. There's a lot of fans, and again, Mexican fans are, in my mind, the best. They go all in. We always flood the zone.
Why have you never been to a game?
I don't know. It just never happened. I'm a fake soccer fan, basically. Every 4 years, I am a fan.
I'm like that. I'm like a fair weather fan.
Yeah, me too.
If the Patriots are in the Super Bowl, I'll watch the Super Bowl. Other than that, I really don't care. But a couple of callers before, when we were talking about this, our listeners said, you guys don't get it because United States, okay, soccer's coming on big now, but it certainly wasn't big 50 years ago.
Right.
We got the NFL, we got baseball, we got basketball. That they were saying that what we don't get about this whole moment is that this is the big sport for much of the world. We're the outliers, and we don't understand the importance of the players, and the individual countries.
I would argue, though, that it's changing here in the U.S. A lot of immigrants. Like, I read the other day this statistic, and I couldn't fact check it in time to include it in my column, but apparently there are more fans in the U.S. rooting for the Mexico national team than there are rooting for the U.S. national team. So I would argue that there is a big fan base, but you're right, the competition of all the sports leagues, you have the NBA, the MLS, you have all these sports. It makes it hard for soccer to break through when you don't have a critical mass.
I'm laughing not at you. I'm thinking, as I hadn't thought of this till you said it, I live in Inman Square in Cambridge, and I'm maybe, 3/4 of a mile away from a heavy Brazilian community in Somerville. And when Brazil is playing in any tournament that matters, the World Cup, if you have your windows open, you can hear the cheering.
My colleague was telling me the same thing. Renee Graham was telling me the same thing. When I lived in Alston, Brighton, they would just never shut up. Like, they would keep me up at night. And that's same thing. Because Brazilians are a big, big population here in Massachusetts.
Okay, so I introduced you talking about in-state tuition for undocumented kids who have spent most, if not all, of their lives after babyhood here. I think, I'm not sure I'm right about this, I used to lobby at the State House a long time ago, but I think this bill was even being discussed then, 20-some years ago. Here's my perspective on this. You make a really compelling argument. You can share it with our audience in a second. It seems to me that the reaffirmation of driver's licenses for undocumented people in question 4's victory probably provides some momentum to nervous legislators, basically, that there's not this anti-immigrant thing, even in Massachusetts, that they've been worried about for years. Do you buy that notion?
100%. I think you're correct, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this article, because I was talking to an advocate a couple of weeks ago, and he was the one who sort of put it in context for me. He said to me, look, you guys just passed driver's license. Across the country, that is a measure that is harder to pass than in-state tuition. And you guys haven't done in-state tuition. And I'm like, that is actually true. And why don't we have state tuition? So that's why I started sort of going into the history. And you're totally right. It was even introduced in the early 2000s. But as you remember, back then, Mitt Romney then ran, on the platform against bilingual education. And so that's why, that measure or that bill caught that sort of anti-immigrant momentum, and we never took it again. But now this driver's license victory definitely validates, I guess, the advocates' push. And this
what's the
is
argument for it on its merits? Forget question 4 for a second. What's the argument on the merits for doing this?
So everybody knows Dreamers, right? Undocumented kids who were brought here by their parents through no fault of their own. Most of them, or some of them, don't even know they're undocumented until they actually reach college. And so President Obama did the program, DACA, for them, which is obviously it's gnarled in the courts, blah, blah, blah. But locally, the DACA population here can be treated as, if they want to go to state universities, they can be treated as U.S. citizens. As you know, all state universities, colleges, they have two different tuitions. They have for citizens or out of state. Undocumented immigrants have to pay the out of state rate. And so that's
what's
why
the differential, roughly?
So that's the thing, because there are no real numbers, but it could be tens of thousands. It really could be tens of thousands. It could be a few thousand. Arizona just passed this measure in state tuition, and it was a hard battle there. As you know, that state is a battleground state, but they won. And over there, it is, I think the population affected is less than 10,000, but still, we want to open access to higher education to the a large amount of people. Why wouldn't we do this? Again, these people are Americans. Sometimes they don't even know. Like, we put them through the K-12 system only because this is what happens. The cost, the differential, you were asking about the differential, it could be, a few thousands of dollars. They just don't enroll. They just don't enroll in college, and we sort of lose that opportunity to grab them and put them in the higher education system and educate them. And this, at a time of our workforce needs are pretty significant.
Well, particularly in light of the fact that the latest statistics I saw, which are a couple of years ago, the percentage of kids who go to public universities in Massachusetts and stay here is going down now, but is still at a number that's high enough that for employers worried about finding workers, it's a real asset that they don't currently have.
And we just passed question 1, sorry. And we have money, to invest in public education. And so anyway, because the people who argue against this, it's like, why are we subsidizing these people's education? Well, it's a benefit for us, but also we have money.
We're talking to Marcela Garcia from the Boston Globe.
So, Marcela, you wrote another column. There was a lot of talk after the election this year and before the election, too, that the Latino vote was turning against the Democrats moving toward the GOP. You argued that the Florida voters were outliers. What'd you say?
So, indeed, the data points, everything points to the fact that Florida voters who overwhelmingly supported Ron DeSantis and a lot of Republican candidates for Congress this year were Latino. DeSantis won Miami-Dade, one of the first Republicans to do it in years, and that has to do with the Latino population, right? There was a total red wave in Florida, but that was the only place where it really happened. Everywhere else, it didn't really materialize. In Nevada, Latinos were basically key, right? To keep the Senate, to give Senator Catherine Cortez Masto's re-election in Pennsylvania as well, and so this idea this narrative, I think, that Latinos are leaving the Democratic Party en masse is flawed. However, I think we saw that in places where Latino voters helped or voted blue, they did so because they had outreach. They had, a real program, a real Latino at the table. This is what happened in Pennsylvania, for instance. The Fetterman campaign had a Latino consultant at the table telling them this is how you reach the Latino vote. They had in the World Series of baseball, which Philadelphia went. They had Spanish language commercials, and there's a significant population of Latinos in Philadelphia. So again, they're very persuadable. This is again the latest sort of conclusion of.
Well, you should extend though that persuadable discussion, because you make the point that while DeSantis in Florida won record numbers of Latino votes for the exact same reason you're talking about Fetterman being successful and Cortez Masto being successful in Nevada, because he did what the Democrats did in those states. He did intense outreach, and there was a response, even though one might argue that on the merits, DeSantis is not very friendly to people who are
100%.
Latinos, but nevertheless, his outreach was successful, right?
Democrats in Florida, and this is the question, this begs the question, right? This is something that I want to explore next. Should Democrats abandon Florida? Should they give it up? It's, 2024. It's such a huge, important state for 2024 hopes, presidential hopes. Should Democrats really abandon it? Have we lost it to Republicans? I would argue that we haven't. The Democrats haven't match the level of investments that Republicans have done in Florida.
You know, speaking of migration, you did a wonderful service. Marjorie and I were talking about this at length this morning.
Yeah.
We all hear, just summary statements. Well, Jane Doe and her family came from wherever they came, and they walked thousands of miles, and you all turn to each other and go, oh, that's horrible. And then you move on to whatever television show you're watching. You talked about the 6,000-mile trek of a couple of people, one of whom was, what do you call it, the Martha's Vineyard
the Vineyard 49?
Vineyard 49.
Vineyard 49.
People know who they are. Tell us about the people you interviewed and what you learned about what that 6,000 miles is like.
Right. So it became very clear to me, and thank God for my editor who actually really wanted to send me to places like New York and Martha's Vineyard to talk to these people.
Who's your editor?
Jim Dow, our New York editor,
Great.
editorial page editor, who comes from the New York Times.
Yes, he does.
A lot of these Venezuelan migrants were not just arriving to Martha's Vineyard. Obviously, they were being sent sometimes from governors in Texas and Arizona to New York in like thousands of. And so I started hearing, just talking to people, the humanitarian track, and I was sort of seeing that the news coverage wasn't capturing that part of the piece, because what makes you leave your home and just walk? I mean, I actually did the whole in a map. I went piece by piece, and it was the same story. I talked to many Venezuelan migrants. Everyone told me the same story. They leave Venezuela, sometimes walking because they have no money. They reach Colombia, then they cross into the Darien Gap, which is a jungle, one of the most inhospitable places on earth, walking. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people, 160,000 people have crossed the Darien Gap this year.
About the crocodiles and the jaguars.
I mean, it's beyond. I swear to God, like after listening to these people, you come away with a sense of, how is this possible? How are we allowing this to happen? People going through the jungle, sometimes days without eating. I talked to a family who got lost from their group, because this is the other thing, through the journey, so they go through Panama, Costa Rica, and then Central America, and then through Mexico. Through the whole journey, there's all these little cottage industries to sort of exploit them and charge them for things, like here you have to pay X amount of dollars to cross this river, and now you have to do X, Y, and Z. And so, but the humanitarian piece is astonishing. I mean, Venezuela is really, along with Haiti perhaps, is the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world right now. I mean, obviously Ukraine, barring Ukraine, which is in war, but places that have no war conflict, Venezuela and Haiti, are in a tremendous humanitarian crisis right now, and people are leaving, people are walking, and so there are crocodiles, like you said. There are gangs, like indigenous gangs that prey on women and children. You have to pay extra if you have a daughter, because you want the guy to protect them from the gangs who rape them, and sometimes it's horrifying. And so I wanted to capture that the best I could, and so I told the story of two people. One was part of the Vineyard 49, who he actually has already left the state. He's in North Carolina, and that's the other thing. I want to sort of follow his journey here in America, to see where he lands. He's still obviously not regretting that he's here.
But they can't work.
They cannot work.
Because they can't get permits to work, even though there's a huge need for workers in this country.
It is baffling, and even Governor Baker, to his credit, has written to the Biden administration, not just once, several times, because we're also dealing with this population here. Mm-hmm. There are people coming here, Venezuelans, Haitians, Nicaraguans too. And so our shelter system is completely overburdened. And even Governor Baker has written to the Biden administration saying, you gotta let them work somehow. And there are tools that the Biden administration can use, but again, it's all calling the political.
Elaborate on that, though. What needs to happen to at least get some temporary work permits?
There are different tools, right? Like I guess the easiest one will be temporary protected status, to issue temporary protected status for Venezuelans who have entered since the summer. And so they would be able to immediately be protected from deportation, get a work permit almost immediately. We already have a sizable population of people under TPS. I think it's close to 300,000 right now, but we could expand those to include newest arrivals, the Venezuelans, the Haitians, and that would be the easiest way. right now with the new Congress, also, and this is something that that the president can do on his own. This is
without congressional approval,
right? But anything other than that is going to, require Congress, which is going to be off the table pretty soon, come January.
But it doesn't do anybody any good to have people here who cannot work. How are they going to eat? How are they going to live? I mean,
make sense.
It puts a tremendous burden on the system, right?
On the states too, and I, again, I give Governor Baker for credit for realizing that, yes, we got to take care of this population by giving them shelter, but the federal government also has a role to play in allowing them to get work permits.
Okay, this is a horrible transition to go from this kind of pain.
I know you're going to say.
The story that Marjorie really wanted to talk about was your second dog. Could you describe the conundrum you were facing with your second dog, Marcela Garcia, and what you're deciding to do to fix that issue?
So we have one great dog and one terrible puppy. We got a puppy earlier this year. I take all the blame for it. I convinced my husband. He didn't want to. But I convinced him, and I'm like, great, we're going to have a second puppy. It's going to be exactly like the one we have, because why wouldn't it be, right? And so it's the complete opposite. He is... we call him our little gangster. He's a terrorist. He's a delinquent. He was banned from daycare,
Oh, no.
Yes, and then we had to neuter him, which did absolutely nothing to calm his demeanor. And so one trainer that we worked with, she actually was an animal behavioralist. I got her from Google. But, she recommended, this was at 6 months old, she recommended that we put him on Prozac. And I was like, oh, yeah, maybe this is what he needs. But then I was like, no, how are we going to put my puppy on Prozac? And this is not a knock on Prozac or antidepressants or anything. I just figured that
it's a dog.
It's a dog.
It's a dog.
But there are a lot of dogs in Prozac. A lot of dogs in Prozac. Like I heard from a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people who, this is a column that I usually never read the comments under my column, but this one I try to venture in, because the thing about dog people is that they always want to give you advice, and they always have something to say about, oh, my dog this, my dog that. And so I went into the comments, and I actually found them useful, a few of them. And so a lot of them were like, my dog takes Prozac and it's the best thing ever. They're older, they have anxiety. We're working with a new trainer. We're hoping he's going to be a reformed, canine citizen, but we'll see. The jury's still out. I'm not entirely ruling out Prozac. I mean, it could be anxiety. He's always on high alert. He barks, at everything. It's completely different. He's also very dominant. Like, he's an alpha. And so it's been hard.
And the other dog is not an alpha.
Oh my God, no.
So is the other dog on his back under the tables?
No, I mean, he's just like, he just doesn't care for him. He's
the other
like,
dog's going to need Prozac before this is over. That's part of the problem.
No, don't say that. Don't jinx it. My other dog is perfect. I know everyone says that the dog is perfect.
What kind of dog?
So they're both yellow labs.
Oh, yellow labs.
Yeah.
We usually have pretty mellow personalities.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what happened to Benito. Benito is completely... I don't know. Maybe he does need Prozac. I guess I'll write another column where he does.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Well, I do know a lot of friends whose dogs are on anti-anxiety medication. A couple of people with collies.
Before you go, we only have a minute. You do what Marjorie Egan, former columnist, did, is don't read your comments. And what used to get her really angry, when I first started working with Marjorie, I would read all her comments.
Oh, my husband does that.
And then I'd call her and talk to her about the comments, which really aggravated her.
Masochistic, that's why I don't read
my husband does that for me.
You really don't read the comments?
No, because they're mostly, listen, I know that people want to engage. I know that that it's a good tool, that it could be a good tool. But most of the time when I write about immigration, when I write about Latino issues, they can be pretty hateful and they can be pretty useless. And I'm not saying, and so that gets to you, because sometimes people get personal. Sometimes people say like, well, I don't want to get into it, but they're usually not positive.
So what's your husband do once he's consumed them?
So he just tells me, like, there's a really funny comment, or like I send him as a sentinel, like, just go and like, keep an eye out for me. And sometimes he tells me, but But no, I don't read my. So you think I should read all my comments?
No,
Well,
no, you should not.
Right?
She's
You
a
should
far
not.
better source than I am.
Yeah,
on that issue.
it can be very upsetting.
I figure that if someone really wants to reach out to me, they can email me, and my email is right there. And I do read emails, and I tend to respond to most of them.
Just
the
the
ones
biggest
that are not
mistake
negative.
you've ever made just now is telling people to email you. Good
I
luck.
guess.
Good
Well,
luck,
I mean,
Marcella
they
Garcia.
can also tweet at me.
That's right. Marcella, good luck,
Thank
with,
you so
good
much.
luck with the dog. And
Great
thank
to
you
see
very
you.
much
Thank
for the
you so
piece
much. You're
about
great.
the people's journey, because it was
Thank you
really,
so much.
Really
I hate the
huge.
word impactful, but it was a
It
really
was.
impactful thing
Thank
to
you.
read.
Thank you so
thank
much.
you very much for being here. Marcella Garcia is a columnist for the Boston
Thank
Globe.
you.
She also serves on the Globe's editorial board. Thank you very much for being with us,
Thank you.
Marcella. Coming up, CNN's John King in from Washington. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
Hey GBH members, this holiday season you have access to a treasure trove of PBS programs on GBH Passport. Cozy up with the family to watch all of your favorites, like the new seasons of All Creatures Great and Small and Miss Scarlet and the Duke. Watch as much as you want, anytime you want. If you're a GBH member, you can register online or become a member and sign up at gbh.org/passport.
Support for GBH comes from you. And Mission Safe, working comprehensively with Boston's youth to provide caring relationships, horizon-broadening activities, arts, job training, and more. Details at missionsafe.org. And the Office of the Massachusetts State Treasurer. The Unclaimed Property Division is holding unclaimed funds for the citizens and businesses of the Commonwealth. You can see if you have unclaimed money at findmassmoney.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marjorie Egan, Jim Browdy, live at the Boston Public Library. We'll be back here on Friday, and we're streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News. We're joined now on Zoom by CNN's chief national correspondent, John King. John also hosts Inside Politics weekdays at noon. Hello, John King.
Happy busy Tuesday. How you doing?
Hello, John King. So let's start with the reaction to former President Trump. Had Nick Fuentes, an avowed white supremacist, anti-Semitic guy, and Kanye West, who's said a lot of anti-Semitic things of late, having them for dinner at Mar-a-Lago. There has been considerable reaction, or more than some might expect, from the GOP about this, I think. Is that so?
Yes, it took a while. It was a silent weekend, if you will, but then Washington is back. Congress is back this week for the end-of-year congressional session, the lame duck. And it started principally with Senate Republicans first. A great number of Senate Republicans, including your former governor, now the Utah Senator Mitt Romney, being harshly critical of Trump, others being harshly critical of Nick Fuentes and trying to thread the needle a little bit on Trump. And today, most significantly, the man who wants to be the Speaker of the House and who still needs Donald Trump's support, Kevin McCarthy, was at the White House for a meeting about the lame duck session. And he criticized Nick Fuentes and, to a degree, Kanye West. Kevin McCarthy still would not criticize Donald Trump. He said the former president can meet with whoever he wants to meet with. He said Nick Fuentes has no place in today's Republican Party. And he said later, when he got back to Capitol Hill, he doesn't want any Republican House members associating with Nick Fuentes. He refuses to add at the end of that that Donald Trump should, apologize and say he would never do this reprehensible thing again. But Kevin McCarthy needs Trump's support to be Speaker, so he won't go that far. But yes, including the former Vice President Pence, a great number of Republican senators, and now the top House Republican have condemned those at the meeting. Some have also condemned Donald Trump, but some are reluctant to do that for the reasons, sadly, we've discussed for several years now.
You described the McCarthy thing perfectly. He says at one point outside the White House, I think President Trump came out 4 times and condemned him, didn't know who he was. The reporter responds, well, he just said he didn't know who he was. He did not condemn him or his ideology, to which McCarthy says, well, I condemn his ideology. Also, PBS, Judy Woodruff tweeted out this morning, sent out reporters to talk to 57 Republicans. And admittedly, this was a day ago. The vast majority didn't have the courage to respond to the question about what they thought about the Fuentes-West Trump meeting. And of those who did, John, again, a day ago, the only two people who had the courage to say Trump's name were Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, and Mitt Romney, who we know has always had a iffy relationship with Donald Trump. The fear of this guy, even on an issue like this, is palpable. It is unbelievable and unrelenting, you know?
And Jim, I think the more, to me, frightening part of it, or troubling part of it, is it's not just fear of Trump. It's fear that a significant percentage of their voters. Right. And so I get it in a vacuum. I get it, right? I need to win an election, and I can't offend a lot of people who I want to vote for me. So on, what's your favorite chocolate bar? What's your favorite ice cream? Maybe some more policy positions, more serious things than I'm trivializing it. There may be some things where you can be gray and hedge the things. I don't believe on hate. You can be. I believe that you have to put your principle ahead of your power and risk your power to stand by your principle. And that's where this gets troubling for me. And that's why I do think, when you have a Senator Romney who says Donald Trump continually proves that when we think he's reached the bottom, he finds a new bottom, I think that's courage. Now, Utah's a special state. Trump is not as popular in Utah as he is in other places. Romney he has said repeatedly this week when he's asked about this, remember, I voted twice to remove him from office. So he is not unique, but he's in a select few among Republicans who are willing. He doesn't like this. He doesn't come running for the cameras to beat up on Donald Trump, don't get me wrong. But when he gets asked the question, he's at least willing to understand that hate is, condemning people who spew hate and spew conspiracy is more important than any job.
Do you believe we have to have this discussion? It is unbelievable.
Here's what I wonder. I know you're not a mind reader, but is the point from Donald Trump's perspective of having Nick Fuentes and Kanye West for dinner at Mar-a-Lago is, okay, I'm going to court the racist anti-Semitic vote?
And the guy will fawn over him.
I mean, is that does seem odd, or does he just assume that so many people in the United States are racist anti-Semites?
Marjorie, you are so awesome for having me on this program every Tuesday. You are the wonderful host in the radio business.
Exactly.
Look, I'm not Dr. Freud.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we had Dr. Freud, Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, and whoever else you could think of could solve the riddle of why Donald Trump will continue to put people that, he says I didn't know him, right? So
I didn't know him. I love that.
It's not like he's not a barista at a coffee shop serving a coffee to a guy who walked in and ordered it. Then you found out he was a reprehensible human being, and you say, I'll never let that guy in my shop again, right? He's the former president of the United States. The guy showed up for dinner at his resort where they have pretty high degree of security, including Secret Service protection. Pick this up. Find your search engine. Type in Nick Fuentes. It takes seconds. You understand who you're dealing with here.
Yeah.
And any decent human being would then say, bye. You're not welcome in my home. You're not welcome in my restaurant. You're not welcome in my resort. Or the alternative, turn around and walk away. Say, see you, bud. Have a nice life. Not with me.
Well, also remember, it was not too many years ago when I asked, he said he didn't know who David Duke was either, head of the Klan. And then when any of us Googled, we saw him talking about David Duke by name in prior years. Speaking of Trump, John King, we want to ask you to psychoanalyze him again when he's told that his handpicked candidate for the United States Senate from Georgia, Herschel Walker, does not want him to come campaign for him. He's going to do a telephone rally, whatever that means. I don't even know. Do you have a sense, whatever X number of days out, I guess it's 8 days, 7 days, whatever it is, 8 days.
Week from today, we count them.
A week from today. Okay. Do you have any sense of the state of the race?
I do not, in the sense that we've not seen any polling that I have seen in recent days. If it exists, I haven't seen reliable polling on the race. Democrats are very encouraged by the early voting numbers, which are off the charts. Now, it's also just to be careful here in this strange year and in this particular state. The Republican operation of the governor, Brian Kemp, who just won re-election convincingly, he's not against early voting like Trump is. And so they set a record yesterday, more than 300,000 early votes cast yesterday. It's the highest single day early voting record. So that the citizens of Georgia, whatever their political views, are participating again. They have had to vote so many times in recent years because you have to get 50 plus in the primary, or else you have a runoff from the primary. Then you have to get 50 plus in the general, or else you have a runoff. And so this is Senator Warnock's third or fourth election in 2 years. And the fact that citizens, whatever their political views, are lining up to vote in the holiday season and everything else, I mean, bless them. We talk a lot about the warts on our democracy, the election denial still going on in Arizona, for example. When you see people participating, I think we should cheer. We should just cheer and applaud them for coming back out. So the Democrats are encouraged by the early voting. That, that's piece of it. We'll count them next week and we'll know.
Can I ask one last thing about are you going to talk about the Georgia race or move on?
I was going to go to Carrie Lake.
One last thing about the Georgia race is, while we know there are two Democratic senators, Sinema and Manchin, who are not let's eliminate the filibuster kind of people. So even if the Democrats end up with 51, thanks to Fetterman flipping a seat, there's still one short. Have you thought at all about the additional pressure? It's one thing when you're one of two, because you can always say, well, even if I flipped and was willing to do a carve out on the filibuster, for example, for voting rights or some gun issue, there's always Manchin or there's always Sinema. You can't do that anymore if you're at 51. Your vote could put the Democrats over the top. Is there any thinking about how that could benefit the Democrats or no?
I've not heard it in that context, especially because what a lot of Democrats would say is that now that's a more difficult vote, because the map in 2024, you have a lot of senators in states Trump carried, senators who have to get Republican votes or Trumpy votes. That do you want to do that right now? Plus one of the most important relationships in town right now, as Republicans take the House, is how much business can the president do with Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans. And so if you annoy the Senate Republicans by changing the filibuster, so I think there are a number of pressures that suggest that that's going to be not off the table, but even less likely to happen. Plus, Maggie Hassan just won re-election in New Hampshire. She didn't like to talk about this. She's not at the head of the let's change the filibuster train either. Okay. It's not just Manchin and Sinema. There are a number of other Democrats who would prefer not to do it. If they had to have a public vote, they might go along with the party pressure. But I think that one's going to temper. But that still makes the Georgia seat is still hugely significant, because 51, not 50, means you get a majority of the members on the committees. The committees are not evenly split between Democrats and Republicans.
Like they are now.
Yeah, so it's easier to get things out of committee, including nominees like that. And plus you have subpoena power in committees where you don't have it now, or the Republicans would have to agree to any subpoena issued by a Senate committee right now. So there are a number of other procedural and political powers the Democrats get. Even though it's just one seat, it changes the dynamics of the United States Senate, not to the degree like a filibuster or having 60 votes, but beneath that, there are a number of ways in which it's very important.
So we mentioned Carrie Lake from Arizona. She ran for governor. She's the former TV anchor out there who lost her race, but she's not conceding. She's an acolyte, I should say, of the former president. She's not conceding the election, and at least one county, I believe, if I'm wrong, has refused to recognize the votes, which I think is against the law. I mean, what happens out there in Arizona?
The state is now suing Cochise County. It's a modest county. I think it's about 55,000 votes. It's in the southeastern corner of Arizona. The state now has to sue them to certify the election because they have a couple of members of the election commission Republicans who are saying, we don't want to certify it because we don't trust the voting machines. We're back in the Dominion machines conspiracy, lunacy. Hugo Chavez from the grave is coordinating, American elections. I don't know why you didn't know that. Forgive me. I make jokes about this because it makes me so sad, as someone who's done this for nearly 40 years and just loves elections and loves democracy and really salutes the public servants who do this for little or no money, counting the votes and doing all the stuff that happens out there. So the state is suing. Let me give you a little funny take on this. Not funny, but an ironic take on this. If the county just refused to count its votes and the state lost the lawsuit and you took those votes off the table, Republicans would lose a seat in Congress, because they won a district down there where they had those votes. So this is how lunatic this is. They would also lose a local election where the Republican won. If you took the votes from that county away, Democrats would actually win 2 races. That is the degree to which these election deniers are willing to go. They're not thinking logically. They're not thinking strategically. They're not even thinking in the interest of their own party. They're just caught up in this conspiracy and this lie. What's most likely to happen is that the courts will tell this county it has to count the votes, and that those Republicans will still win. Those votes will then be added. But you're right, Carrie Lake and Mark Fincham, who's this candidate for Secretary of State, they have still not conceded. And when the Maricopa County certified the results yesterday, anyone who wants to see what happens when you have a former president, but at the time President of the United States, push this conspiracy, push these lies for years and years and years. You want to see what happens? Go watch video clips of the Maricopa County Election Commission meeting yesterday to certify their election results, and the people calling them traitors, liars, cheats. This is in the bloodstream now, and it's sad, and it's also dangerous.
Well, Jim Browdy was predicting that Kari Lake was going to become the next president of the United States a couple of weeks ago.
I was.
She did lose in Arizona, obviously, but she was a very compelling candidate. A lot of big crowds, a lot of enthusiasm around her. Where do you see, is there a place for her in elected politics now? Could
Trump's
she be
running mate.
Well, exactly.
This is a fascinating question in the sense that think about past elections, in your state or national elections, where sometimes a candidate loses. She lost a very close race,
right?
And so she had a choice to make, right? If she had, in the old way of thinking, right? This is why I tell you sometimes my experience is absolutely useless because we live in this new world that I don't fathom, can't fathom sometimes. In the old days, what a good politician would have said is, I just lost by, I think it's 20,000 votes in the end or something like that. But I lost a very competitive race.
Right.
I'm going to concede. I'm going to wish my opponent the best. I'm going to say that I'm going to watch him or her every single day because the issues I campaigned on are still important to me. And I would then prepare for my next election, whether it's running in a rematch in 4 years or the Cinema Senate seat you just mentioned, Jim, is up in 2 years. Kari Lake could have turned defeat into the beginning of the next campaign, which a lot of politicians do, especially people who run for the first time. And they lose because they're not very well known. But instead, she decided to stay in this lane. So even if she runs again, which she may well run for something again, this is the lane she's going to run in. She could have shifted her politics a bit here, right? She chose not to. Whatever you think of her, she's a very smart woman. So she made this choice to stay in this lane.
Yeah.
Around the country, I do think there's evidence that this lane is getting more narrow and that this lane is getting less successful. Will it in Arizona? I don't know, but she made a very clear choice here. I think she believes she still has a future in politics. But her choice now, she will carry with that whatever she decides to do next.
Well, but John, where her lane is not more narrow? In Mar-a-Lago. And I have believed since the beginning of this absurd decision of hers based on nothing, that she is, we've talked about this in other contexts through the years, she's talking to an audience of one, not the courts of Arizona, but candidate Trump, who is obviously not going to be having Mike Pence on the ticket this time. And I think she sees it, act like Trump, and Trump embraces you, and take it from there. So that's my sense.
I think that is a very smart post-it note to keep to watch.
John, before you go very quickly on an up note, Respect for Marriage Act will pass, and I assume make it to the president's desk in this little window. In fact, an immediate window. Is there anything else that the Democrats and or Biden are looking for that has a chance of passage before the Republicans and getting to Biden's desk before the Republicans take over in early January in the House?
The new thing the president put at the top of the list today was legislation to prevent this rail strike, which is interesting. You have a pro-union president essentially picking a fight with organized labor, saying, sorry, you should have taken this deal. I can't. That's one. There are a couple of other things the Democrats would like to do, Jim. I just don't see it happening. Some modest immigration things they'd like to sneak in. The bigger question is, are they going to pass, forgive me, America, and forgive me, Greater Massachusetts, an omnibus, which is Washington speak for a budget for all of next year, or are they going to pass a continuing resolution, which just gets you government funding for a few months? House Republicans want just a few months because they want to. Then they want to be in charge when you have the next round of budget negotiations. They want to have more leverage. And so if you can pass an omnibus, which is what the Democrats want, the president wants, and Mitch McConnell wants, the Republican Senate leader, if you can pass a big bill for all of next year, it is possible a few other smaller policy items can get put into that bill. But you have to watch the House Republicans on that question because Kevin McCarthy still does not have the votes to be Speaker. So he has to answer to the Jim Jordans and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the others who say, if Biden is for it, we're against it.
Hell of American politics. John King, wonderful to see you as always.
Thank you, John. Great to see you. We've been speaking with CNN Chief National Correspondent John King, host of Inside Politics, which you can see every day at noon on CNN. You can also see him a lot at night doing analysis of all the elections. Okay, coming up. Do you reserve the right do not be the life of the party at work, Jim. One Frenchman just affirmed his rights by winning a wrongful termination case, claiming the mandatory work events, like Christmas parties, that he was subjected to were humiliating and intrusive. In holiday work party season, we'll ask you about Christmas parties next, or holiday parties. Your good ones, your bad ones, your worst moments, your best. Do you think you can get fired for misbehaving in a holiday party? 877-301-8970 is the number at which you can call us or text us, 877-301-8970. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library.
Protests against China's strict COVID-19 policies have led to rare, widespread protests across the country. As much of the rest of the world has learned to navigate the ongoing pandemic, will China's unrelenting policies ultimately threaten the very stability of its ruling regime? I'm Melissa Harris-Perry, and that's next time on The Takeaway from WNYC and PRX.
This afternoon at 2, here on GBH News 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you and Newbury Court, a full-service residential community in Concord, Massachusetts, for persons 62 or over, committed to creating an active, independent lifestyle. More at newburycourt.org or 978-369-5155. And New England Dental Group, committed to helping you stop hiding your smile by offering a variety of dental implant solutions to replace missing teeth in one of their 8 locations. Learn more at newenglanddentalgroup.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan live at the Boston Public Library. A Frenchman, as Marjorie says, just won his right not to be fun at work. In a wrongful termination case, this is real. France's highest court has upheld that he didn't deserve to be fired for not participating in certain work social events. His winning argument? Weekend social events, including, quote, excessive alcoholism and promiscuity. Putting aside that every part of the story is the most French thing I've ever read, I wanted to check in with you as we near holiday office party season. Our number is 877-301-8970. Are you reserving the right not to participate in work social events? Or if after 2 years of pandemic isolation, you're actually looking forward to a more relaxed environment with the people you're paid to work with? The number is 877-301-8970. How about you, Marjorie?
Well, apparently people are coming back big time to the holiday parties.
I know
You share
that.
this one
So I
story
read.
about they're going to have the great Gatsby-themed party with a 12-piece band and all this.
Where's that?
This is in New York City.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not in Boston, but people are really back into the holiday parties because we haven't had them for a long time. But there's a warning from CNBC, the business end of NBC, about the kind of things that you should not do at a holiday party, Jim, if you want to keep your job.
What are they?
Well, dancing with a coworker, I don't think that was so bad. You get fired for that. But probably flashing someone is not a good idea.
That's probably, I think
The
that's
office.
not a good behavior.
Christmas party, or kissing a client, or kissing a coworker, or flirting with your boss, or tripping on LSD or other hallucinogens.
That's probably good but unnecessary
You probably shouldn't
advice.
do that. Yeah, you probably
The
shouldn't
number
do
is
that.
877-301-8970. What are your rules for for Christmas parties? What are your rules? What are your do's and don'ts? Do you have fun? Now, as I said to Keith Lockhart, I'm not a fun kind of guy outside of this. And one might argue I'm not a fun person during this either. I actually love, especially when you live through the pandemic and stuff, getting back together with people in a totally relaxed setting. I mean, the one thing isn't on the list, you shouldn't Xerox your behind. Like a lot of people, remember when we were younger at Christmas parties?
Yeah, the Xerox machine.
The next pot over, somebody was pulling down their pants and making a copy of their derriere. You probably shouldn't do that. Having said that, I mean, isn't there all this pent up thing? Aren't you dying to go to Christmas parties? I mean,
Well, I haven't been invited to many yet.
Well, that's a problem. That is an inhibitor.
But the one I've been invited to, I am attending that. So
Oh,
I'm
you
very
are?
excited. Yes, I am. I'm very excited about that. But I think there is a danger at the holiday parties. You hear this a lot of people having too much to drink. I get this French guy. I mean, I guess as you say, these parties in France sound really, really wild.
France.
He talked about mock sexual acts, crude nicknames, having to share his bed with another employee during work functions. I mean, they're taking it
never
to
had
a
to do
whole
that?
no, they're taking it to
Yeah.
a whole nother level in Paris. But I get the idea, especially if you're somebody that's not a drinker or you're in recovery or something, that maybe you don't want to go to a party and be
Well,
absent.
maybe people shouldn't get drunk at the damn holiday parties. How about that? How about having a drink? I'm not talking about somebody who is an alcoholic who obviously isn't going to drink, but those who do. How about doing it in semi-moderation, even
In
though it's
semi-moderation.
Christmas?
Did you read the note from our staff?
I did.
Yeah.
Let's go to Jim in Rockport. You're next on Boston Public Radio. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hey there. Just hearing about holiday parties makes me think of about 30 years ago, L.A. Worked for a third-party insurance administrator, very, very conservative insurance company.
Yeah.
20 grand or more on a hotel right on the ocean. It was a blast. They weren't conservative with their drinking, that's for sure. I was very surprised. Told my wife to sit here. I'm going to go up to one of the rooms that a colleague had rented to party a little more. Came back. She was gone. Spent 3 hours, about 2 a.m., looking for my valeted parked car all over Santa Monica. Finally found it. Somehow got home and found my wife in a pool of her own throw-up.
Oh,
in the front of the door.
Really glad you
Well,
told us that.
That was the beginning of my divorce.
Wait a second. The Christmas party, it caused you and your spouse to end the relationship?
Well, it was the beginning of the split. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that is very
And
sad.
So, my advice to you.
Yeah,
my
what is your advice?
Don't drink so much or at all at Christmas parties.
Yeah, Jim, that is a
Jim,
thank you for the call.
Even if your boss, hey, have another one, your boss says. Nah.
Yeah.
God, well, that's an evil laugh. Did you just hear Jim's evil laugh there at the end?
But
Thank you for the call.
he's not
Jim.
the only person whose marriage is falling apart over a Christmas party because people drink
Who do you
too much.
know?
I'm not going to
Do you know,
talk about.
when we were at the other radio station, we can't name names. Do you remember a very famous person in town had to be taken home by one of the producers?
Well, those kinds
because
of things
what he was doing
happened. He had too much to drink, and he was hitting on a couple of women, as I recall. But in any case, a lot of people have too much to drink, and they do things they wouldn't do if they were sober, and they get in big trouble because.
How pathetic is that? By the way.
Well, you know what a lot of parties do? They say no spouses. That's a problem.
Well, that's dangerous.
Right? That's a problem. But that's what they're, inviting when they say no spouses, because you tend to keep an eye on your spouse at the Christmas party if you are a married person.
Speaking of spouse, I want to share with you a very moving story I
Yep.
shared with you and my coworkers this morning. Is when I used to work at a different place, not here.
Correct.
I went to the Christmas party right around the corner, actually, at a very nice restaurant. And my boss, who was a woman, was there. And she had said to me for months she wanted me to meet her, I think it was boyfriend, I don't know if it was her husband quite yet, it became her husband. This is a true story. And I walked over and I shook her hand and said, it's great to see you. She said, I want you to meet my, again, husband or boyfriend. And this is I'm raising my right hand. I said to the boyfriend or husband, so what do you do? He had had a few drinks. You know what his answer was? Her. How, and what are you supposed to do? It's your boss standing in front of you. Exactly. Well, that's where the danger of drinking, which I guess was the point that Jim from Rockport made. Let's go to John in the car. We're talking about holiday or Christmas parties here on Boston Public Radio. Hey, John.
Hello, guys. I worked for a company that sold electrical supplies. It's no longer in business.
Yeah.
And we merged with another company.
Yeah.
So they canceled the Christmas party.
Oh.
And they had, I think it was about 7 of us branches all do inventory that weekend instead. Then they rescheduled the Christmas party, rented a nightclub down by the World Trade Center before we even called it the Seaport District.
Yeah.
Rented the whole place. We used brand new, it's called 500 MCM, the wire that brings the power into your home, cut it up, put it on a pallet, brought it to the junkyard. And that's how the Watertown branch paid their portion of the bill for the party. And then none of us went.
What'd you say? None of us went?
Yep.
Well, what's the takeaway from that story? What lesson should we learn from that, John, in a car?
Well, I really think that companies, if they say they're going to have a good party, they really ought to have the good party and not just cancel it.
I think that's
but
probably...
it's also a wonderful, funny anecdote.
It was a pretty good anecdote.
Was
John,
a very
thank
good
you for
anecdote,
sharing
John.
that with us. We appreciate it.
We have some texters weighing
What
in.
do they say?
Well, one of them says, holiday parties are absolute torture for introverts. Bosses and managers need to keep that in mind. They really do have a negative and exhausting effect on some people. Another texter, again, mandatory office parties are forced fun, just like the French guy that sued. I come to work. Don't expect me to waste my time with your pretend to be happy soirees.
You're reading that with a lot of enthusiasm. Do you subscribe to that? Don't you look forward to seeing your coworkers?
I love holiday parties.
At the end? I do too.
Yeah, but part of the fun of it is watching other people carrying on. You know what I mean? That maybe don't control
No, I don't know
what
what you
they're
mean. What do you
imbibing.
mean?
In an earlier job, the bosses eliminated cash bonuses, says another texter, replacing them with a big blowout holiday party. I'd prefer the cold, hard cash to forced office fun. We have a lot of people here, Jim, who don't really get into the office party at all.
Well, except that last person said no office party if the alternative is cash. Do you remember, I keep talking about places we used to work. We worked at another radio station where I think there were 5 radio stations
We had
down
lots
the hall.
of holiday parties.
There were not only were there lots of holiday parties. Do you remember this? We were probably, of the 5 radio stations, 4 music and us, maybe the lowest paid 2 people.
Lowest paid.
We're lowest
It was an
paid.
American tragedy.
And there's a point of this, by the way.
Yep.
The boss walked down the hall right before Thanksgiving, I think, and gave out $25 gift cards to Star Market so you could buy a damn turkey. Don't you think everybody, regardless of income, was thrilled by the fact that they got the gift card? I did.
Yeah, it was like a stampede for $25.
No, but I'm saying, but even people who were making $500,000 or whatever the hell they were making down the hall.
Gift cards,
were
Jim.
thrilled. Gift cards
Gift
are the
cards
ticket.
can ease over a lot of crises,
a lot of pain.
and hurt feelings. Okay, here's Mark from
You ever
Sharon.
misbehave, by the way, at a, I mean, I say this against you. You have a higher liquor tolerance than I do. I think we both agree to that. So it's not a criticism.
Yeah.
It's an observation. Have you ever crossed the line at a holiday party, a Christmas party?
Well, I just remember a party that, I don't know what happened. I had a drink and I felt it was like, I don't know what happened.
So what happened?
Well, I spent the entire holiday party in the women's room, Jim, is what
Is
I
that
did.
really true?
Yeah, I didn't feel
sad.
well. It was very sad. Mark from Sharon says, I once worked for a guy that didn't go to our work parties. I asked a colleague why. He told me my boss once gave the Nazi salute to his boss after drinking too much. And
that should probably be on the list from CNBC about something you should not do at a Christmas party. 877-301-8970. When is our Christmas party here? Do you have any idea when that is?
I do not know when our Christmas party is. No.
But they are having one.
We've had our colleagues play music at our Christmas parties before. We have kind of an in-house band.
What do you think of that?
Performs at Christmas
What do
parties.
you think of that? Raise your right hand when you respond to this.
I think there are a couple of very talented musicians there and a couple of not so talented musicians. So it makes for a cacophony, Jim, at the Christmas party. But
we haven't had a Christmas party, obviously, because of the pandemic for a couple of years. But before the pandemic, you know one of the wonderful things about the Christmas party?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say this? Am I going to get in trouble for this?
I don't know.
One, there was no drinking, which at a Christmas party, is that not an issue?
Well, it's an issue in terms of people loosening up, I guess.
Well, there's another thing. This is several years ago, so no one should get upset about it. It was also potluck. Does that count as a Christmas party? If you got to bring some, you know what I mean, at the workplace?
I don't know.
I think you do know, Marjorie.
I don't know. Yeah, it's probably not that fun. I mean, we had great parties when I was at the Boston Herald. We have
big drinkers at the Boston Herald.
Big drinkers.
Too.
We used to go to J.J. Foley's in the South
that.
End, and it was a really fun party all the time. And people were happily taking Ubers home, or they're leaving their cars in the parking lot at the Boston Herald, because it was a hard partying crowd there at the Boston Herald.
Do you remember at our radio station, our first Christmas party, the late Jay Severin walks in a robe, holding, what was he holding? A Cosmopolitan?
Cosmopolitan, that's right.
As he walked through the room. That was really a memorable kind of scene. Bob in Gloucester, you are next on Boston Public Radio. We're talking about the dangers and the benefits of Christmas parties, at work, that is. Hi, Bob.
Hi, how are you?
I think we're
thank
good.
you.
What's up?
Well, I just started a new job that I don't want to screw up because I like the job.
Good.
And they have, they're throwing a company party.
Yeah.
And I and not real comfortable. There's a personality at work that I don't want to have to deal with. I don't know what the alcohol situation is going to be. And I think I'm just going to defer and come up with a plan B, which is going to be plan A. Like, I don't have a date to work with right now. So I don't mean a romantic date. I don't have a date on a calendar.
So you can't say you're busy on that date yet since there isn't a date. Is that your point?
That's the plan A. Oh, well, I've already made plans for that day.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. You better come up with a good lie, Bob, especially if you're a new employee. But I understand the reticence. I don't think you are alone. Let us know how it goes, Bob. Thank you for the call. By the way, Lynn on YouTube asked the question, isn't your party going to see the Gold Dust Orphans show, Ryan Landry? That is the BPR
That's right.
party. We are next week.
Yeah, it's not the whole station.
We're going to see the great Ryan Landry. And by the way, let me just do a promotion for that since Lynn brought it up. If you want to have fun, don't bring the kids, by the way. Absolutely do not bring the kids. The Gold Dust Orphans and whatever this little Christmas tree shop of horrors this year, it's a huge amount of bawdy fun. And by the way, part of the cast, even though it's our recorded voices, would be Marjorie Egan and me, Jim Browdy.
That's right.
First time ever.
That's right. We're included in the play. We're very happy
are
about
indeed.
it. So have you ever gotten in trouble at a Christmas party? Probably not, Jim, because Jim has
I can't drink.
three
I
sips
have a
of
half
beer, and he needs to be carried out in a stretcher.
No, I'm not the kind to Xerox my behind. That's not my sort of MO. Would you not? By the way, for whatever it's worth, people, that's the traditional. I have literally worked with people who've done that at Christmas parties and Trump walked around drunk and proud that you can see a photocopy of their behind, which
Joe,
I'm not that interested in, to be perfectly honest, if anybody's thinking of doing it.
Joe in Hingham, thank you for calling.
Hey, Joe, what's up?
Well, good afternoon. Thanks
to
for hearing me today.
Sure.
Still, I work for a very large company, and every year the parties got smaller and smaller. People didn't care as much, weren't happy with management. And then one winter, they left on our lunch table for our Christmas party / bonus a stack of Kit Kat bars with a note saying, "Have a break on us."
That is grotesque. So what was the reaction, Joe?
Oh, we laughed. We said, "Just very typical of this place," and away we went.
Are you still there?
I am still here, but not much longer. After 32 years, it's time.
Yeah, Kit Kats don't do the trick. I mean, I love Kit Kats, by the way, but they don't do the trick come Christmas bonus time. Joe, thank you for your contribution to the show. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970.
Chris from Boston says, last year I made my last day at the office. He made his last day the office holiday party and managed to get drunk enough to tell a coworker that her promotion was the reason I was leaving the firm. Yeah, a lot of bad things can go on at the holiday party.
So what are you suggesting? Don't do this thing?
Well, I just think you have to be very careful. You
have to act like a girl. Oh, we're done. Oh, the show's over.
We are done.
Whoops.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, we are done.
We're done.
Yes, thank you very much for listening to
why
us
the
today
music's
on Boston
playing.
Public Radio. Thank you for people that came down to the Boston Public Library to see us. That means a lot. We have a podcast. You can keep up with us 24/7 by way of our podcast, which is called, of course, Boston Public Radio. Tomorrow we're going to be joined by NYU medical ethicist Art Kaplan, Andrew Cabral, the former sheriff of Suffolk County, the folks behind the Earthshot Prize, presented here in Boston by British royals Kate and William, the next king and queen of England, Andy Ihnatko on tech news, and naturalist and author Cy Montgomery for the Afternoon Zoo. We want to thank our crew, Zoe Matthews, Aidan Conley, Mackenzie Farkas. Additional support by Gia Orsino. Brendan Deedy, our engineer, is John the Claw Parker. Bill Piacitelli is sitting in for John today. Our executive producer is Jamie Bologna. And special thanks to the gang down here at the Boston Public Library, Angelica Marrero, Evelyn Brito, Steve Barici, and Colin Cockrell. What's on TV?
By the way, let me just say, if you didn't hear Marjorie, if you're going to the holiday party, tip number 10, do not trip on LSD or other hallucinogens. I think that's very important advice.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We're going to do a little World Cup. This is now before the match. That'll be after the match. And secondly, two executives from a company in Massachusetts that are introducing this blood test that will give you early notification about possible cancers in dozens of cases. A huge breakthrough. They're joining me tonight. That's Greater Boston at 7 o'clock. I'm Jim Browdy.
I'm Marjorie Egan. Thanks again for tuning in.
Thank
Hope
you
you
so
can
much.
tune in tomorrow, and meanwhile, have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Comcast Business, providing technology solutions for your starting or growing small business, including internet, phone, and Comcast Business Security Edge. Comcast Business, powering possibilities. Restrictions apply, actual speeds vary. You know her as the brave woman who risked her life and freedom to liberate others from slavery. Learn more about the legend of the greatest freedom fighter in our nation's history on Harriet Tubman, Visions of Freedom. Tonight at 7:30 on GBH2.
I'm Arun Roth. Coming up on GBH's All Things Considered, Governor Baker and Governor-elect Healy are giving an update on the state's progress fighting the opioid crisis. People hurt in last week's Apple Store crash in Hingham are filing suit. And Lowell residents are recovering after last night's major water main break. Those stories and all the day's news starting at 4 on GBH's All Things Considered.
Trusted, local news. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR.